Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Midnight Stories. Now, I know a lot of you use these videos to fall asleep, so before you drift off, I thought it would be nice if everyone could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from the world. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Alright, let's get comfy, relax, and begin. I rented a cabin deep in Vermont last October, hoping the quiet would help me focus on finishing a manuscript I've been putting off for months. My apartment in Boston had become too noisy, too cramped, too full of distractions. I wanted complete isolation. No internet, no phone signal, no neighbors. Just me, my laptop, and a few weeks of peace in the woods. The cabin was small, tucked at the end of a long gravel path barely wide enough for my car. It was surrounded by trees, thick, tall pines that blocked most of the sky. The place had a kind of forgotten charm. Wood-paneled walls, creaky floors, a wood-burning stove that took half an hour to really heat the place. There was no TV, no radio. The closest town was almost 40 minutes away. It was perfect. I spent the first 2 days settling in. I read, made coffee on the little propane stove, and walked through the woods during the afternoons. At night, the silence was absolute. No traffic, no voices, not even the buzz of streetlights. Just wind in the trees and the occasional crack of branches outside. The bedroom was in the back of the cabin. Small, just a bed, a dresser, and a narrow closet. That first night, I didn't notice anything strange. But on the second night, while unpacking, I found the hatch. It was inside the bedroom closet, above head level, set into the ceiling. It was about 2 feet wide, square, made of the same wood as the rest of the cabin, with a small metal latch. At first, I assumed it was just an attic or crawl space. Nothing unusual, but it caught my attention. I stared at it longer than I probably should have. It was just a hatch, but something about how it blended so well into the ceiling made it feel deliberate, like it wasn't meant to be noticed. On the third night, around midnight, I grabbed a chair, stood on it, and unlatched the hatch. It took some effort to push it open. A cloud of dust fell down when I did. I shone my phone's flashlight into the space. It was a crawl space, maybe 3 feet high. Wooden beams, insulation, nothing else. Just an empty, dusty void above the bedroom. I closed it and forgot about it. For a day. That night, I woke up around 2 a.m. The room was cold. I could hear something, a soft shuffling sound, like something brushing against the walls. I lay there for a while, not moving, thinking it was just an animal outside, a raccoon or a squirrel. But it didn't sound like it was outside. It sounded closer. The sound stopped after a few minutes. I convinced myself it was nothing. The cabin was old. It creaked. Wood settles. That kind of thing. The next night, the same thing happened. This time I heard what sounded like breathing. Slow, steady breathing. It felt close, too close. I stared at the ceiling in the dark, wide awake, trying to pinpoint where the sound was coming from. It seemed to come from above me, from the crawl space. I didn't sleep after that. I kept the lights on and tried to read, but I couldn't focus. My eyes kept going to the closet. The 5th night, I heard my name. Just once. A whisper, like someone exhaling the words slowly from the corner of the room. I froze. I didn't move for hours. I didn't get up. I didn't open the hatch. I didn't even turn off the light. I sat on the bed, blanket pulled up to my chin, staring at the closet. The next morning, I told myself I was losing it. Too much stress, too much isolation. I hadn't spoken to anyone in days. Maybe I was just imagining things. Cabin fever, or whatever they called it. Still, I needed to know. I set up my phone to record overnight, just to see. I placed on a nightstand facing the closet, hit record, and left it running as I lay down. I didn't sleep that night either. I couldn't. I kept glancing at the red light on the phone, counting down the hours until morning. When the sun finally came up, I stopped the recording and started watching. The first few hours were normal. Just me shifting in bed, the occasional flicker of headlights from distant cars far down the hill. Then, around 3:14 a.m., I saw it. The hatch in the closet slowly opened. Inch by inch, a hand reached out first. Pale, thin, long fingers. It pushed the hatch fully open. A face followed, gaunt, skin like it hadn't seen sunlight in years. Sunken cheeks, eyes wide and unblinking, reflecting just enough of the phone's light to glow faintly. It didn't move for a long time, just stayed there, looking straight at me as I slept, watching. Then it slowly closed the hatch again. The recording went on. Nothing else happened. I must have watched that clip a dozen times. I couldn't believe it. There was no sound, no creaking, no breathing. I hadn't heard it at all, and it wasn't a raccoon. It was a person. I didn't pack carefully. I shoved everything into my bag, grabbed my keys, and left within 10 minutes. I didn't check the crawl space. I didn't try to figure out who it was or how they got there or why they were watching me. I just drove all the way back to Boston, barely stopping except for gas. I left the cabin unlocked, the lights still on. I never contacted the owner, never asked for the deposit back. I didn't even leave a review. I just blocked the rental site's emails and tried to forget it. But I still have the video. I've never shown it to anyone. I don't even open the file anymore. It's just there, buried in a folder on an old hard drive. Sometimes I wonder how long that person had been up there. Was it only after I opened the hatch? Or had they been living above me the whole time, staying quiet, waiting until I let my guard down? I don't know. I don't want to know. I haven't rented a cabin since. I haven't left the city, actually. I keep a baseball bat under my bed now, and I check every closet, attic, and crawl space the moment I move into a new place. I still write, but I don't go looking for peace and quiet anymore. Sometimes silence is the scariest thing of all. I don't really believe in haunted places. Never have. But there's one camping trip I went on 2 years ago that changed the way I look at those old signs and stories people throw around about cursed or haunted sites. I still don't think there was anything supernatural involved, but something was definitely wrong with that place. I'll tell it the way it happened. I was going through a rough patch at the time. I'd been laid off from my job, was living alone, and everything in my apartment just felt heavy and stale. I needed to get out, clear my head. So I packed up my camping gear, tent, sleeping bag, cooler, tools, and hit the road. I wanted somewhere quiet, isolated, no people, no phone service. I drove north, deep into the woods of upstate, past the lakes and marked trails, until I found a rough dirt road that looked barely used. I followed it for about 40 minutes, bouncing over rocks and roots until it ended near a small clearing surrounded by trees. No signs, no campsites, just wilderness. I set up my tent at the edge of the clearing and got a fire going. It was perfect. Cold air, birds chirping, wind in the trees. It felt like the first real breath I'd taken in months. I stayed close to the fire until night came, ate a simple meal, and crawled into my sleeping bag. That first night was fine. Quiet. Nothing but the normal sounds of the forest, branches creaking, the occasional owl. I woke up once around 2 a.m. to pee and noticed how still everything was. Like unnaturally still. No wind, no rustling, no insects. Just dead quiet. It was odd, but I didn't think too much of it. The next morning, I walked about half a mile into the woods in search of water. I found a small stream running between some rocks. Cold, clean water. I filled up my bottles and followed the stream for a bit, just exploring. That's when I found the sign. It wasn't official or anything. Just an old, weathered plank nailed to a tree with faded red paint on it. It read, "Do not camp here." No explanation, no warnings, just that. It looked decades old. Faded, chipped, the edges rotting away. I figured it was just leftover from some logging operation or maybe someone's idea of a prank. Either way, I ignored it. The clearing I found was perfect and I'd already set everything up. Back at camp, I spent the afternoon collecting firewood, sharpening my knife, just small tasks to pass the time. Around dusk, I heard something. It was subtle at first, like distant knocking. Faint, hollow, like someone hitting a tree with a stick every few seconds. It came from deeper in the woods, just beyond where the firelight faded. I listened for a while, but it stopped. I didn't think too much of it. Probably a woodpecker or some natural echo. That night was different. It felt colder. The air inside my tent was still, but I kept waking up feeling like someone was watching me. I'd sit up, look around, nothing. Just blackness outside the mesh windows. At one point, I heard what sounded like footsteps circling the tent. Not running, just slow, heavy steps in the pine needles. I stayed still, holding my breath. The steps stopped after a minute or so. I didn't sleep much after that. When morning came, I got out of the tent and looked for tracks. Nothing. No disturbed ground, no prints, not even deer. It was weird. I started feeling uneasy, like something was off balance, like the woods were pressing in around me. I thought about packing up, but convinced myself it was just my mind playing tricks from sleeping poorly. Around noon, I found something that really made my skin crawl. About 20 yards from my camp, wedged between two trees, was a pile of rocks, maybe 3 feet high. It looked too deliberate to be natural, stacked carefully, almost like a marker or some sort of boundary. I hadn't noticed it before. At the base of the pile was a patch of disturbed dirt, like something had been recently dug up or buried. It wasn't fresh, but not old either. I didn't touch it, just stood there staring at it, tried to convince myself it was nothing. But the longer I looked, the more uncomfortable I felt. That's when I noticed the birds, or rather, the lack of them. No calls, no wings flapping. Total silence again, just like the first night. By the time evening rolled around, I made up my mind to leave in the morning. I didn't want to pack up in the dark and drive that rough road at night, but I was done. I couldn't explain it, but I felt watched. Not just uneasy watched. That night was the worst. I barely slept. Around 1:30 a.m., I heard that knocking again. Louder this time. 5 knocks, then silence. Then 5 more. It sounded like it was getting closer. I stayed inside my sleeping bag, clutching the knife I kept in my boot. Then I heard something new, metal scraping. It was slow, like someone dragging a shovel through gravel, just beyond the tree line. I sat up, every nerve in my body on fire. I wanted to get out of the tent to check, to shine a light, but I couldn't make myself move. I waited. The scraping stopped. Then came the breathing. Heavy, labored, almost wheezing. It was right outside the tent. I held my breath and listened. 30 seconds. A minute. Then nothing. Just silence again. I didn't sleep at all. The sky finally started to lighten around 5 a.m., and I bolted out of the tent. Everything looked normal. No footprints. No signs of anyone or anything being there. I tore down the tent, threw everything in the car, didn't even bother folding it all properly. Just shoved it in and got out. As I drove back down the dirt road, I passed the tree with the old red sign. I stopped the car and got out for one last look. This time, I noticed something I hadn't before. Below the faded "Do Not Camp Here," in even more faded letters, barely visible under layers of grime, were a few more words. Burial grounds, 1921, asterisk, asterisk. I got back in the car and didn't stop until I hit the main road, and even then I kept going until I found a gas station with people. I didn't talk to anyone about it for a long time. I didn't want to sound crazy. I looked up the area later. There wasn't much information, but I found a single newspaper clipping from the early 1920s about a small logging town that had been nearby. Apparently, during an outbreak of something, maybe the flu or a mine collapse, they buried over a dozen men in a temporary site out in the woods. The bodies were never moved. The article didn't say exactly where, but I knew. I knew exactly where. I still go camping sometimes, but never off the map. Never on unmarked land. And never anywhere that feels too quiet. When I was around 13, my family took a weekend camping trip not too far from where we lived. It wasn't anything fancy, just a couple of tents, some folding chairs, a cooler full of sandwiches and drinks, and a small fire pit. My parents loved to do stuff like this. Get away from the noise, spend time outdoors, no cell service, no distractions. My younger sister was there too, and my older cousin came along that time, which was cool because it made things feel a bit more exciting. I remember the air was chilly at night, but not freezing. It was one of those late spring weekends where the days were warm enough to wear t-shirts, but the nights still held onto a little bite in the air. That second night of the trip is the one I'll never forget. We had spent the day hiking a nearby trail. I was exhausted by the time we came back. My legs were sore, and I remember my shoes had so much dirt in them it felt like I was walking with tiny rocks in there. We had a late dinner, hot dogs, chips, and some canned beans, and sat around the fire for a bit. My dad always liked to poke the fire with a stick and throw in extra kindling to make it flare up every now and then. The fire was big that night, bigger than usual. I remember my mom saying something about keeping it down because the wind had picked up a bit, but nobody really thought anything of it. The fire was in a small pit surrounded by rocks. It felt safe enough. Eventually, everyone started turning in for the night. My sister and cousin were already curled up in their sleeping bags inside the tent, and I followed not long after. I don't know how long I was asleep, but at some point in the middle of the night, I woke up. No sound woke me up, no movement. I just suddenly opened my eyes. The tent was quiet. My sister was breathing softly beside me, and the fabric of the tent made that soft fluttering noise from the breeze. For some reason, I sat up and looked out through the small screen window on the tent. From where I was lying, I had a pretty clear view of the fire. It was still burning, not wildly, but the flames were high enough to notice. The wood we had put in earlier must have still been going strong. The orange light from the fire danced on the nearby trees, casting strange shadows that moved and shifted with the flames. I couldn't explain what I was feeling at that moment. It wasn't fear yet, but something was off. I just kept watching the fire, like I was waiting for something. And then I saw it. A man, at least I think it was a man, walked in the light of the fire. He didn't come from the woods, not that I saw. One moment the fire was alone, the next he was standing right there beside it. His clothes were dark and loose, and he moved slowly, like he was in no rush. He wasn't carrying anything. He didn't look around. He didn't seem to notice the tents, or our chairs, or the cooler, or any of our stuff. Just the fire. He stared into it for a second, then leaned down and picked up one of the burning logs from the pit. I couldn't move. My entire body felt frozen. Not like I was paralyzed, just locked in. My heart was pounding, but I couldn't take my eyes off of him. He lifted the log like it weighed nothing, and it was on fire. I saw the flames licking up around it, bright and red and yellow, and some embers fell to the ground near his feet, but he didn't react. He didn't flinch. He just raised it up slowly, rested one end of it on his shoulder like a bag of tools or a piece of wood you'd carry to a shed, and then turned. He walked off in the same way he came. Slow, calm, not looking around, not hiding, just walking straight ahead into the trees. The weirdest part? The fire started dying almost immediately after he left. The flames got smaller, the wood settled, and the crackling faded. I just sat there, still frozen, still staring. I must have sat there for 10, maybe 15 minutes, wide awake, not moving a muscle. At some point, I fell asleep again. Not sure how. I didn't even realize I had until morning came and I heard the sound of zippers and footsteps and birds. I got out of the tent and looked around. Everything seemed normal. My parents were setting up for breakfast. My cousin was brushing her teeth at the water spigot. But then I walked over to the fire pit. The ash was still warm, but not hot. There were blackened pieces of wood and some half-burned sticks scattered around. But one of the bigger logs from the night before was missing. I walked around the pit slowly, not saying anything. Then I noticed something that made my stomach feel cold. Near the back of the fire pit, about 2 feet away, were 3 small cans. 2 of them were half-empty lighter fluid containers, and one was a small metal gas can. My dad had used them the first night to help start the fire when the wood was damp, but I remember him setting them far away from the fire afterward. No one had moved them closer. They were way too close now. I even remember thinking how weird it was that they didn't catch or melt from the heat. If the fire had gotten any bigger, if even one log had rolled just a bit in their direction, it could have been a disaster. The slightest change in the wind, a few sparks, and we could have had a fire spreading through the dry leaves and pine needles around our site. That's when it hit me. What if the man, the figure, whatever it was, what if he had taken that log on purpose? What if it wasn't random? I didn't tell anyone about what I saw. Not that morning, not on the drive back, not even years later. Every time I thought about saying it out loud, the words just felt too strange. I didn't want to sound like I was making it up. I even convinced myself that maybe I was half asleep and imagined the whole thing. That it was just some weird dream, mixed with the shadows and the firelight. But I never forgot the way it looked. The way the man walked up like he belonged there. The way he held the burning log like it didn't hurt him. The way the fire seemed to shrink the second he walked away with it. Even now, as an adult, when I think back to that night, it gives me chills. I've gone over every possible explanation. Maybe it was someone camping nearby. Maybe he was drunk or high. maybe he was just some crazy guy. But there were no other campers for at least a mile in any direction. We checked the map, and nobody else reported anything weird that weekend. No one saw anything. No one heard anything. And besides, who picks up a flaming log with their bare hands, carries it on their shoulder, and walks away like it's nothing? There's a part of me that still wonders if he saved our lives. If by taking that log away, he prevented the fire from growing too big. If he hadn't, maybe it would have tipped or rolled toward the gas can. Maybe the whole site would have gone up in flames. Maybe we would have all been asleep when it happened. It's the not knowing that bothers me the most. I've told myself again and again that there's a rational answer, that there has to be. But the more I think about it, the more I realize that maybe there are things that happen out there, out in the middle of nowhere, where it's quiet and dark and there are no street lights or fences or people watching. Things that don't follow the rules we're used to. Things we can't explain. And maybe that night, one of those things saw a fire getting too big, too close to something dangerous. And maybe, just maybe, it decided to step in. I never went back to that same campsite. Not because I was scared of what I saw, but because I feel like I wasn't supposed to see it in the first place. Like it was a one-time thing, something meant to happen quietly and unseen. And I just happened to wake up at the wrong moment and look out at the right time. Or maybe the right moment. I still don't know. I needed to get away for a while, and I'd always been drawn to remote places. I'd spent most of my life around cities, always surrounded by noise, traffic, phones ringing, people yelling through walls. It wears on you after a while. So I booked a small raised cabin deep in a swamp area of Louisiana. It sat on wooden stilts maybe 6 or 7 feet off the ground, with a narrow walkway leading to a dirt road that curved out of sight. I found it online, listed as off-grid, peaceful, and quiet. It was all of that. There was no cell reception out there. I had to drive about 15 minutes back toward the highway just to get a signal. No internet either. Just a propane stove, some lanterns, and a small generator that the owner told me to use sparingly. I brought a cooler full of food, a few gallons of water, and a couple paperbacks. I planned to stay for 5 nights. The first couple of days were calm. It was hot and muggy, like most of Louisiana in summer, and the sounds of frogs and insects never stopped. At night, they got louder. Sometimes it almost felt like a wall of noise around the cabin. Cicadas buzzing, frogs croaking, things splashing in the water out in the dark. I didn't mind it though. It was a different kind of noise. Wild, but not human. No drama, no talking, just nature doing its thing. I'd sleep with the windows open, just the mesh screens between me and the outside. The cabin had 2 rooms, a small main area with a cot, a table, and the kitchenette, and a tiny bathroom with a composting toilet. Basic but enough. I didn't need anything fancy. On the 3rd morning, I decided to explore the area under the cabin. There was no skirting or wall around the stilts. It was just open air beneath. I wanted to make sure the structure looked sound and also just to kill time. As I crouched under the edge, I noticed a small pile of bones near the middle. At first, I figured maybe an owl had dropped them or a fox had dragged some food under there. It looked like small animal bones, ribs, a few leg joints, maybe from rabbits or something. Nature being nature. But then I saw something else a few feet away. A rolled up sleeping bag, sun-faded and dirty, partly wedged between 2 of the support beams. Next to it was a white plastic bucket with a lid. It was stained and had scratches all over it. I didn't open it. I didn't want to. The sleeping bag looked like it had been there a while, grimy, flattened, and damp at one end like it had been soaked from the last rain. I backed out and stood there for a while, just listening. Nothing but the usual swamp sounds. No footsteps, no voices, nothing out of place. I told myself maybe a hunter or someone had squatted there at some point. Or maybe someone had gotten lost, slept there a night or 2, and moved on. Still, it put me on edge. I kept looking back toward the trees, tried to convince myself no one was nearby watching me. That night, I made sure all the windows were latched shut and the door was locked. I took the knife from the kitchenette drawer and laid it beside me on the cot. I left the porch light on even though I knew it would attract bugs. I just needed some kind of barrier between me and the dark. Around 2 or 3 a.m., I woke up to the sound of movement directly below me. It wasn't an animal. It was too deliberate. I could hear footsteps on the soft dirt under the floorboards, slow, careful steps. Then a pause, then another step, then two more, shifting the weight of something or someone. I stayed frozen on the cot, barely breathing. My ears were wide open, trying to pick apart the sounds from the usual swamp noise. There was no mistaking it. A few minutes later, I heard something heavier, footsteps on the deck outside. The wood creaked, just once then again. I sat up, holding the knife tightly in my fist. I didn't move to the window. I didn't want to be seen. I just sat there listening, heart pounding in my chest so hard it felt like it might burst. Whoever it was didn't try the door. They didn't knock. Just stood there. I don't know how long it lasted. Maybe 2 minutes, maybe 10. Then the steps moved away. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I just sat there in the dark, knife in hand, sweat pouring down my back. When morning finally came, and the first light started to cut through the trees, I unlocked the door and stepped outside. I looked around carefully. The walkway, the woods, the path. Nothing. No one. But when I turned to go back inside, I saw it. A note, folded in half, had been slipped under the doorframe. The paper was yellowed, torn at the edges like it had been ripped from a notebook. One sentence written in what looked like a pencil. "You're louder than the last one." I stood there for a long time, reading it, rereading it. My mouth went dry. My hands started shaking. There was no name, no signature, just that sentence. I didn't bother packing up properly. I shoved everything into my duffel bag. Books, food, clothes, didn't even check to see if I left anything behind. I tossed it in the passenger seat of my car, started the engine, and drove. Fast. I didn't look back at the cabin. I didn't stop until I hit pavement. At a gas station about 20 minutes away, I parked and sat there for a long time with the door locked. I kept watching the mirrors, half expecting someone to come walking out from the trees. I finally got my phone signal back and checked the listing for the cabin. I emailed the owner, told them something wasn't right, that someone had been living under the cabin. I didn't wait for a reply. I didn't go back for a refund or any follow-up. I didn't want any more contact. I just wanted distance. I deleted the listing from my saved folders, removed the trip from my calendar, and never told anyone about what happened until now. It wasn't the bones that bothered me the most. It wasn't even the footsteps. It was that note, that single sentence. It meant someone had done this before. Someone else had stayed in that cabin. Someone else had been watched. And whoever left that note, he wasn't new to it. That cabin's probably still standing out there in the swamp. Still listed as quiet, peaceful, off-grid. Maybe someone's there right now. Maybe they're sleeping, thinking they're alone. Maybe someone's already watching from beneath the floor, listening, waiting for their turn to leave a note. I had never been to spurs camping before this trip, but my girlfriend had done it a few times and convinced me it would be fun. If you don't know what that is, it's basically camping with absolutely no amenities. No bathrooms, no running water, no picnic tables, no trash bins. Just wilderness. It's free, and you're on your own. You're supposed to camp at least 100 to 200 feet away from any water source, and when you need to go to the bathroom, you dig a hole at a certain depth and bury your waist. She kept saying how peaceful and raw the experience is, and I was in the mood to get out of the city, so I agreed. We left on a Friday morning and drove several hours out to this forested area in the mountains. It was pretty remote. The road was mostly dirt for the last stretch, and I started losing signal about 10 miles out. The campsite wasn't marked or anything. We just found a clearing not far from a dry creek bed and set up the tent. The sun was shining, and there wasn't a soul in sight. I had to admit it was beautiful. The trees stretched high and wide around us, and the air smelled like pine and cold earth. There were a few patches of snow in the shadows, but most of it had melted. My girlfriend had a checklist for all the gear, so I didn't worry much about what we packed. She said she had a new collapsible shovel and already packed in the crate with the cooking gear, so I didn't bother to double check. That night, the temperature dropped fast. It was in the 30s and the wind didn't let up at all. I'd packed warm clothes, but not enough layers. We had a small campfire going until around 10 p.m., then we crawled into the sleeping bags and passed out. The cold makes you tired fast. I fell asleep to the sound of trees creaking and the wind pushing against the sides of the tent. Around 2 a.m., I woke up with a sudden, horrible cramping in my stomach. The kind where you don't get any warning. Just 1 second you're asleep, and the next it's full-blown panic. I knew instantly that I was about to have a serious problem. My stomach was turning itself inside out, and I felt this growing, twisting pressure that told me I had minutes, maybe seconds, before it was too late. I sat up fast and tried to stay calm, but that only made things worse. My heart was pounding, and the cold air inside the tent made my skin feel like it was burning. I tried to move slowly, quietly, but every second counted. I shook my girlfriend awake to ask her where she put the shovel. I didn't want to wake her, but I had no idea where the thing was and I needed it now. She told me it was in the crate by the back of the car. I grabbed my flashlight and scrambled out of the tent in just my thermals, socks barely pulled on, and boots half-laced. The cold hit me like a slap in the face. The wind made my eyes water instantly, and my breath came out in thick clouds. I ran to the crate near the car and started digging through it like a maniac, tossing aside pots, pans, foil, a fuel canister, anything that wasn't the damn shovel. Every second felt like a lifetime. My body was betraying me, and the pain was getting unbearable. I started sweating, even though I was freezing. Finally, I found something that looked like a shovel. Not the one I'd expected, though. It was some cheap-looking plastic trowel, short as hell and flimsy. I didn't care. I took off running toward a patch of trees, maybe 30 feet from the tent, away from any water source, and started digging as fast as I could. But the ground was like concrete. Frozen dirt, rocks, dry roots. The shovel bent on the first try. I knelt down and started clawing at the ground with both hands, barely able to see what I was doing with the flashlight tucked under my arm. My fingers went numb. The wind held around me, and I could feel it cutting through my thin clothes like knives. I got a shallow hole scratched out, maybe 4 inches deep. Not enough, but it was all I had. I yanked my shorts down just in time. I barely made it. I mean, barely. Even then, it got messy. The relief was instant, but so was the realization that I had absolutely nothing to wipe with. I had left the toilet paper in the tent. It was one of those things I thought about while sprinting away from the crate, but I figured I'd have time to run back if I needed to. I didn't. I looked down at my hands, already coated with dirt and mud. I had no choice. I used my hand, just one quick swipe to get the worst of it off. It was horrible. My nails were already packed with frozen dirt, and the texture made me want to vomit again. I tried to clean my hand in the snow, but there wasn't much left on the ground. I ended up walking back to the tent, holding my hand away from my body, shaking from the cold, my insides hollow and raw. Back near the tent, I grabbed one of our water jugs and poured on my hand and lower back, scrubbing with the coldest water I've ever felt in my life. I was gasping and cursing under my breath the whole time. I used some spare socks to dry off and tossed them into a trash bag. I stood there for a second in the dark, just completely drained. The wind was quieter now, and I could hear my girlfriend snoring faintly from inside the tent. When I finally crawled back into the sleeping bag, I was too cold and wired to fall asleep again. I laid there for at least an hour, still feeling the cramps in my stomach, waiting for round 2, but it never came. Eventually, I drifted off. The next morning, I felt like I'd been through a war. My hands were scraped and raw. My legs were still trembling. The shovel I'd used was on the ground next to the crate, and I pointed at it, telling my girlfriend that it had barely worked and almost made me shit myself. She looked confused. Then she walked over, picked up a black pouch I'd tossed aside the night before without opening, and unzipped it. Inside was the actual shovel. A nice one. Solid metal, collapsible, sharp edges. Perfect for digging, even frozen ground. I'd thrown it aside in my panic, not realizing what it was. I just stood there staring at it. I didn't say anything. There wasn't anything to say. The rest of the trip went fine, but that night kind of stuck with me. There was no supernatural moment. No creature in the woods. No stranger watching us from the trees. Just a raw, miserable reminder that sometimes the scariest moments are when your body turns against you and you're alone in the middle of nowhere. Try to dig a hole in the dark before it's too late. I learned 2 things. Always check the gear yourself, and never trust your stomach after eating dehydrated chili mac. We had been looking forward to our camping trip to Franconia Notch in New Hampshire for months. It was me, my wife, and our 3 kids packed into the SUV, ready for a full week of hiking, swimming, and just being outside. The place looked like something out of Nature magazine. Tall pine trees, crystal clear rivers, and clean, cool air that made you want to breathe deeper. We had a solid routine going by the second day. Hike during the day, eat, and unwind by the fire at night. We visited the basin, hiked parts of the Ridge Trail, and stopped by every scenic spot we could find. My kids were filthy from playing in the dirt and jumping into streams, but they were happy, and that's all that mattered to me. That second night, we got back to camp late after a long day on the trail. Everyone was wiped out, but we still had to eat, and the kids were starving. I threw together a quick meal on the camp stove while my wife helped the little ones clean up. After dinner, we all pitched in to get the campsite tidy before bed. We were staying at one of those semi-rustic campgrounds. There were outhouses, a water pump, and not much else. No power, no cell service. You really had to be prepared. I had just finished scrubbing the last pan with some river water and was leaning into the trunk to stow our cooler when something caught my eye at the edge of the trees. A large shadow moved, slow and deliberate. At first I thought it was a dog, but when it stepped into the glow of our lantern, my heart just stopped. It was a black bear, a big one, way bigger than I ever imagined I'd see that close. He wasn't 10 feet away from me, right next to our picnic table, sniffing around the ground where my youngest had dropped part of her hot dog earlier. I froze. I could have reached out and touched his nose. That's how close he was. I had always told myself I'd stay calm in a situation like that, but my brain went blank for a second. My wife and kids were zipped up in the tent behind me. If this thing charged, there was nothing between them and it but me. I had a big metal spoon in my hand from the dishes. It was all I had. I slowly bent down, grabbed the nearest pot, and smacked it with the spoon as hard as I could, right in front of the bear's face. The sound was deafening in the quiet night, just this harsh metal-on-metal clang that echoed through the trees. The bear jerked back, paused for a second like he was weighing his options, then took off into the woods. My heart was pounding so hard I thought I was going to black out. I barely had time to breathe before he came back. Not even 2 minutes later. Same path, same sniffing around the table. I did it again, another hard bang, 2 quick hits this time, and I stepped toward him as I hit the pot. The time he took off deeper and didn't come back. I kept my eyes glued to the tree line for a long while after that, just waiting. My hand was shaking. That bear had zero fear. If I hadn't been out there doing dishes at that exact moment, he probably would have torn through everything we had. I didn't tell my kids about it until the next day. No point in scaring them. We stayed the rest of the week, and things mostly went back to normal, but that bear moment stuck with me. I'd say it was the second scariest part of the whole trip. The number one came on our last night. It was the 4th of July. The weather all day had been beautiful, sunny, high 80s with barely a cloud in the sky. We went swimming, did some more light hiking, grilled hot dogs again, and then drove into town to watch the fireworks. They had a great display set up near a lake, and it was one of those perfect small town celebrations. Everyone clapping, kids waving glow sticks, lawn chairs all over the place. We headed back to the campground around 10 p.m., still buzzing from the day. Everyone passed out not long after we got back. Around midnight, I woke up to the sound of thunder. Not far off rumbles either. This was right on top of us. I unzipped the tent and stepped out into a nightmare. Rain was coming down in sheets, and the wind had picked up fast. The fly on the tent was starting to lift at the corners, and rain was pushing under it, soaking the edges of the floor. My oldest son woke up and helped me hold down the fly while I grabbed a tarp from the car. We tried to throw it over the top, but the wind was so strong it ripped it right out of our hands twice. We finally got it anchored with some rocks and rope, but by then, we were soaked and shivering. And then the branches started falling. Not twigs, full limbs, snapping and crashing all over the campground. I saw one bounce off a car roof not 20 feet from us. Tall pines were bending so low, I thought they were going to snap in half. I saw tents literally lift up and fly into the trees like they were made of paper. People were throwing their stuff into their cars and driving off. Headlights flashed through the trees, tires spinning in the mud. Some left their tents behind. Some didn't even bother with their gear at all. We couldn't leave. There was no way I was leaving all our stuff behind, not 14 hours from home. And trying to pack up in that storm would have been just as dangerous. Trees were swaying hard, mud was pooling everywhere, and the visibility was maybe 10 feet. I sat in the car with my family after we made sure the tent was as stable as it could be. I didn't sleep at all. Every gust of wind felt like it might be the one that drops a tree on us. My hands gripped the steering wheel the whole time. At one point, I actually put the car in drive, ready to floor it if something started coming down on us. By morning, it looked like a war zone. Tree limbs everywhere. Tents shredded, some flattened. The gravel roads were covered in debris, and a few power poles were down near the entrance. The campground staff were already out with chainsaws trying to clear things. A couple of cars were dented badly, and I heard someone say a guy down by the lower loop had a tree fall on the corner of his camper. We packed up slow and careful that morning. I was running on zero sleep, my clothes were still damp, and I was starting to feel the weight of the whole week hit me. My wife offered to drive, but I didn't trust anyone else behind the wheel in my state of mind. I white-knuckled the steering wheel through New Hampshire, then Vermont, barely keeping my eyes open. Around midday, we found a little family-run farm store off a rural road. One of those places with goats out front and jam for sale inside. My wife and kids went inside to grab snacks and stretch their legs. I stayed in the car and just closed my eyes. It wasn't sleep really, more like slipping in and out of consciousness for half an hour. It helped, a little. The rest of the drive was a blur. 14 hours of trying not to let my exhaustion take over, replaying the bear in my head, the storm, the way those tents lifted like they weighed nothing. The weird thing is, it's one of my favorite memories now. Everything went wrong, but we came out of it safe. It reminded me how fragile everything is. One storm, one animal, and things can flip fast. But at the time, I was scared in a way I hadn't been since I was a kid. That kind of fear where you don't know what's coming next, but you have to keep moving because you're the one holding it together for everyone else. I don't think I'll ever forget the sound of that wind through those trees, or the way that bear looked at me before he ran off. I wouldn't trade the experience for anything, but I don't think I ever want to relive it either. It happened last year, in early November. I remember that because the trees had just started turning orange and red, and there was a constant chill in the air that made everything feel quieter than usual. I wasn't doing anything special that week. I was off work for a few days, just using up some leftover vacation time before the year ended. I didn't have any plans to go anywhere. I was just staying home, catching up on some things I've been putting off, cleaning out the shed, fixing the loose bathroom faucet, stuff like that. But one afternoon, I decided to take a walk. Not because I had to, but just to clear my head. I hadn't left the house in 3 days, and I could feel myself getting restless. I live in a quiet neighborhood, kind of tucked away near the edge of town. There's a walking path that runs along the backside of the development, cutting through a bit of old wooded land before connecting to a more developed park a couple miles down. It's not popular. Most people drive to the park if they want fresh air. The path behind my neighborhood stays empty most of the time, especially during colder months. That's probably why I liked it so much. So that day I put on a hoodie and some boots, and I headed out around 3 p.m. The sun was still out, but low enough that the trees were already casting long shadows across the pavement. It was quiet like I expected. I walked slowly, not in any rush, just enjoying the sound of leaves crunching under my boots and the cool wind on my face. I didn't bring my phone or anything. I didn't think I'd be gone long. Maybe 15 or 20 minutes into the walk, I saw something strange up ahead. At first I thought it was a log or a fallen branch, but the closer I got, the more I could tell it wasn't. It was a backpack lying right in the middle of the path. It was dark green, a little dirty, like it had been dropped or tossed aside. I stopped and looked around. No one was there. The trees swayed in the wind, and a few birds chirped overhead. But other than that, everything was still. I don't know why, but I walked up to it and crouched down. I didn't open it, just looked at it for a while. It fell out of place. Too clean to have been sitting there long, but no one else was around. After a moment, I stood up and stepped over it, continuing on down the path. About 5 minutes later, I heard footsteps behind me, slow and steady, just one set. It was subtle at first, like leaves being shuffled. I stopped walking. The footsteps stopped. I turned and looked behind me, but there was no one there. I waited for a bit, staring back toward the curb in the trail where the backpack had been. Nothing, just the wind again. I told myself it was probably an animal, a deer or a fox maybe, something that heard me coming and froze. I kept walking. Another 10 minutes went by. I was getting closer to the section where the trail meets the park fence. That's when I started feeling like I was being watched. The kind of feeling that makes the hairs on your neck stand up, even if you don't see or hear anything. I stopped again and turned around. Still nothing, but the feeling didn't go away. I started walking faster, not running, just picking up the pace a little. I looked back every few seconds, and that's when I saw it. Someone was standing behind a tree, not far off the trail, maybe 20 feet, just far enough that the trunk covered most of their body. But I could see part of their shoulder and legs sticking out. They were wearing dark clothes. I couldn't see their face. I froze. I didn't say anything. I didn't move. I just stared. After a few seconds, they shifted, just slightly, like they were leaning to look at me. I turned around and walked fast. I didn't run because I didn't want to give them a reason to follow. At least that's what I told myself. My heart was pounding. Every few seconds, I glanced behind me, but I didn't see them again. I made it to the park, crossed the field, and followed the sidewalk back to my neighborhood. I didn't stop until I was inside my house with the doors locked. For the rest of the day, I tried to forget about it. I didn't tell anyone. What could I even say? That I saw someone standing near a tree? It didn't seem serious enough to report. I tried to convince myself it was just a hiker. Maybe someone cutting through the woods who didn't want to be seen. It was weird, yeah, but not enough to panic over. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every little sound outside made me jump. I kept checking the window near my back door, even though I live in a pretty safe area. I didn't see anything. The next morning, I found something in my front yard. It was the green backpack, the same one I saw on the trail. It was sitting just a few feet from my front steps. I stared at it for a long time. I didn't touch it. I backed up and went inside. I called the police this time. They came out, took a look, asked me some questions. They opened the backpack in front of me. Inside was just a hoodie, a water bottle, a notepad with some scribbles on it, and a disposable camera. Nothing dangerous. No ID, no name. The officer asked if I wanted to keep it or have them take it. I told them to take it. I didn't want it anywhere near me. They said they'd file a report, but it probably wasn't anything to worry about. Probably just a prank or someone messing around. I didn't agree, but I didn't argue. That night, I didn't sleep again. I kept hearing things outside. Light tapping sounds like pebbles hitting the window. I didn't look. I just sat in the dark with every light in the house off. Around 2 a.m., I heard the sound of my gate creaking open. My backyard gate. It's old and rusted, and it makes a loud, distinct noise when it moves. I grabbed a flashlight and went to the back door, but I didn't turn it on. I looked through the tiny gap in the curtain, but I didn't see anyone. Then, something moved in the yard. Just barely, like someone crouching near the side fence. I turned on the flashlight and banged on the glass. Nothing. They were gone. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. The next morning, I checked my backyard. There were fresh footprints in the dirt near the fence. Heavy ones, deep, like boots, but they didn't go in a straight line. They went from the gate to the back window, then circled around the side. I followed them with my eyes and saw they ended near the corner where my shed is. Then nothing, like the person just disappeared. I put up a camera that day, just a cheap one I ordered online and mounted near the back door. It covered most of the yard, and it recorded motion clips to my phone. That night, I watched it constantly. Nothing happened, but the next night it did. At exactly 3:14 a.m., the camera recorded movement. A person walked into my backyard from the side gate. Same dark clothes, face covered by a hood. They walked slowly, looking right at the camera. Then they walked up to it, leaned in close, too close to see clearly, and then pulled something out of their pocket. The feed went black. They disabled the camera. I didn't even hear it happen. I was asleep for once. When I woke up and checked my phone, I saw the clip. I felt cold all over. I checked the camera and found it on the ground. Wires cut. They knew where it was. They planned it. I called the police again. They came, took a report. They told me they'd patrol the area more frequently, but nothing ever came of it. No one was caught. For weeks, I felt like I was being watched. Every time I went outside, every time I took out the trash or walked to my car, I installed more cameras, better ones. Got motion lights too. After a while, the visits stopped. No more footprints. No more strange noises. It was like whoever had moved on or found someone else. But I still think about it. A lot. The fact that someone followed me from that trail, that they found where I lived, left that backpack as some kind of message, came into my yard more than once just to let me know they could. I don't know who they were. I don't know what they wanted, but it wasn't random. I believe that now. I change all my locks. I even moved my bed away from the windows. I don't go on long walks anymore. Not alone, at least. And I never, ever ignore that feeling anymore. That instinct that tells you something is wrong, even when you can't explain why. Because I did once, and someone was there, watching. I went camping last summer by myself, just for the hell of it. I had a few days off work and didn't want to spend them rotting in front of a screen. I didn't plan it too deeply, just packed up my gear, loaded up the cooler, and drove out. I headed towards an area I'd seen on a hiking forum, some national forest land a couple hours away from town, off a highway that turned into a long dirt road. The kind of place where your phone starts losing signal about 30 minutes before you even arrive. I didn't tell anyone exactly where I was going, just that I'd be off-grid for a few days. I brought enough food, water, a small tent, sleeping bag, and some essentials. I wasn't a newbie to camping, but I wouldn't call myself a pro either. I just liked the quiet, the space, the way the world felt out there. Different, cleaner, slower. The first night was fine. I set up camp in a clearing about a quarter mile off an old Forest Service trail. The trees were thick, but not suffocating. I found a level spot for the tent, gathered some rocks to make a small fire ring, and boiled some ramen on my camp stove. The sun set without drama. The sky turned that deep purple I always loved, and the woods got quiet except for the usual stuff. Crickets, a few distant owl calls, the breeze through the leaves. I woke up a few times during the night. Nothing weird, just the usual noises. Small branches snapping, wind moving through. Once or twice I thought I heard something larger moving maybe 100 feet away, but that wasn't unusual. Probably deer, maybe a bear. I had my bear canister sealed and tucked away from camp, and I kept my knife close just in case. The next morning, I woke early. My body still hadn't adjusted to the rhythm out there, so I was up at the first light. I made instant coffee and oatmeal, then went walking with my small backpack, just water, a snack, and my folding knife. I didn't follow a real trail, just moved with the terrain. I've always liked exploring like that, just trusting your sense of direction, marking key features in your mind. A downed tree with exposed roots, a big flat boulder, a fork in a dry creek bed. I walked for a couple of hours, then turned back. About 15 minutes from my camp, I passed by something I hadn't noticed before. A set of deep boot prints. Not fresh, but not old either. The tread was still clear, the edges only slightly softened. I stopped and looked around. I hadn't seen another person since I left the road, and even then, it was just one truck parked a few miles back at the forest gate. These tracks were heavy. Whoever made them was either big or carrying something heavy. They were pointed toward the area where my camp was, but a bit off to the right. I told myself it was nothing. Could have been someone out here hunting or hiking, but it stuck in my head. I got back to my tent and checked everything. Nothing had been moved. Cooler still sealed. Tent untouched. I felt a little silly being paranoid, so I shook it off and spent the rest of the day reading and carving wood, just small stuff to pass time. The wind picked up that evening, so I skipped a fire and cooked inside my vestibule. Before bed, I made sure to clean everything up like always. No food in the tent, nothing to attract animals. That night was different. I had just drifted off to sleep, probably around 10:30 or 11 when I woke up again. No sound this time, just a feeling. That strange sense when something's not quite right. I sat up in my sleeping bag and stayed quiet. I could hear the trees moving, but under that I was sure I heard footsteps. Not animal movement. Human steps. Slow, heavy, deliberate. They stopped for a bit. I held my breath. Then I heard them again, this time further off to the side, like whoever it was had moved around my tent. Still slow, still careful. I didn't move. I didn't make a sound. I just listened. My knife was under my pillow, so I slowly slid it out and gripped it in my hand. The steps stopped again. Then nothing. Not even wind. I must have sat like that for an hour, waiting, listening, but I didn't hear anything else. Eventually, the fatigue caught up with me, and I must have dozed off because I woke up to birds chirping and light pushing through the tent walls. Everything looked the same. I got out and checked the area around my tent. That's when I saw it. Footprints. Deep, fresh ones. They came from the direction I'd seen yesterday, circled my tent once, then stopped. They just ended. Not like someone walked away. Like they stood there for a long time. The dirt was disturbed in one big, flat patch. Not prints anymore, just a depression. Like someone stood still for minutes, maybe longer. Watching. That day, I couldn't relax. I kept scanning the trees, expecting someone to step out. Every sound made me jump. I packed up my gear, not fully breaking camp, just stuffing what I needed into my pack and leaving the tent pitched. I didn't want to seem like I was running. I wanted to move without drawing attention. I hiked in a different direction this time, a wide loop. I figure if anyone was out there, they might have seen which direction I came from before. Better to switch it up. I didn't go far, just far enough to feel like I was doing something smart. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I stayed fully dressed in my bag, knife on my chest. I didn't hear anything until around 2 a.m. Then I caught it again. Slow steps. But this time, they didn't stop. They walked straight up to the tent. I didn't breathe. I swear my heartbeat was louder than any noise outside. Then I saw the shadow, through the thin tent fabric. Just a shape, no features. A person, standing less than 3 feet away. Not moving, just standing, watching. They stood there for what felt like forever. I didn't move a muscle. Then they left. No rush. Just turned and walked off into the woods. At first light, I packed everything fast. Shoved things into my pack without organizing. Didn't even eat. I was on the trail within 10 minutes, heart still pounding. I didn't take the path I came in on. I bushwhacked straight west, knowing the road curved that direction eventually. I didn't want to risk using the same trail twice. It took me 4 hours of hiking, 2 of which were completely off trail, but I finally hit the forest road. My car was another 3 miles down, and I didn't stop once. I didn't look back. I just kept moving. The whole time, I felt like I was being watched. Maybe I was. Maybe not. When I got back to the car, I threw everything in the back, slammed the doors, and locked them. I didn't even take off my boots. Just started the engine and drove. I didn't relax until I hit the highway and saw the first gas station. I never reported anything. What could I say? Some guy watched me sleep for 2 nights in the woods. No proof. No face. Nothing. I've camped since then, but not alone. Never again alone. And never in that area. I still don't know who it was or what they wanted. But they knew where I was. They got close. Too close. And they stood there, just a few feet away, in the dark, while I pretended to be asleep. That's the part that keeps me up sometimes. The not knowing. The waiting. The thought that if I made a sound or moved wrong, maybe they wouldn't have just stood there. Maybe they wouldn't have walked away. But they did. And I left. And I don't ever plan on going back. I rented a small cabin in Montana for a week in the fall. It was the kind of place you didn't just stumble across. You had to know about it. I found on a forum where people share off-the-grid vacation spots. No cell service, no Wi-Fi, and miles away from the nearest town. That was exactly what I wanted. I needed to disconnect, clear my head, and get away from everything. The cabin was about a quarter-mile from the nearest dirt road, tucked between thick trees and a ridge. It looked old but solid. Wooden walls, tin roof, small front porch with a bench. There was a fireplace inside and a propane stove. I had brought plenty of food, water, extra fuel, and a couple of books. No neighbors, no noise except for the wind and the occasional bird. Just quiet. I had brought a trail camera with me, a motion-activated one. I liked setting it up when I camped or stayed out in places like this. Sometimes I'd catch deer or the occasional coyote, once even a bear in Colorado. I mounted the camera on a tree about 15 feet behind the cabin, pointing toward the clearing behind it. I angled it slightly so it would catch anything walking by, maybe something coming up from the woods or over the ridge. I turned it on the first night and forgot about it. That night was uneventful. I made a simple dinner, read a little, and turned in around 10. The wind picked up overnight, and I woke a couple times to the sound of branches brushing the tin roof, but nothing out of the ordinary. The next morning, I remember the trail cam and decided to check the footage just for fun while my coffee brewed. I popped the SD card into the adapter and checked it on my laptop. Most of the clips were empty, just wind triggering it, leaves moving. Then I saw something. Around midnight, a clip started. At first, it looked like nothing. Just darkness, a few distant shapes of trees, barely visible in the low light setting. But then I noticed it, just at the edge of the range, standing between two trees was a man. He wasn't moving, not walking, not turning, nothing. Just standing there, facing the cabin. You could barely make out the outline, but the shape was unmistakably human. It was like he knew exactly where the camera stopped recording clearly, just far enough back that the infrared didn't fully catch him. He stood there in the exact same spot for over an hour. The clip stopped and restarted every minute or so, standard setting, but he never moved. Just standing. There was no logical reason for anyone to be out there. This place was secluded. No trails, no roads nearby. I hadn't seen another vehicle since I left the main road. Still, I told myself maybe it was a hunter or someone hiking, someone who got turned around and saw the cabin light. But then why not knock on the door? Why just stand there silent? I went outside and looked toward the area where he had been. Nothing there, just trees and thick brush. I didn't see any footprints or signs of someone walking through, but the ground was hard and dry, and pine needles covered most of it. I try not to let it get in my head. It was probably just a coincidence. Maybe I was reading too much into it. That night, I double-checked all the doors and windows, locked everything, kept my flashlight and knife next to the bed. I didn't sleep well. Every creak of the wood, every gust of wind felt louder than usual. But the night passed without incident. Next morning, I checked the camera again. Same time window, around midnight. This time the man was closer, still in the back, but at the edge of the clearing now. Easier to see in the footage. Still not perfectly clear, but close enough to see that he was definitely facing the cabin. Again, not moving, just standing still for hours. Same thing as before, just outside the motion sensor's optimal range, barely triggering the clips. It gave me chills. I checked again outside, walked slowly around the cabin, scanned the trees, the ridge, the slope that dropped off behind the property. Nothing. No sign of movement. No footprints. No broken branches. Just still, silent woods. I considered leaving that day, but part of me didn't want to overreact. I had a rifle in my truck, locked in a case. I took it out, loaded it, and kept it inside with me. I kept the blinds closed that night and left the outside light on. Didn't sleep much. I kept getting up and checking the windows. The back one especially. In the morning, I almost didn't want to check the trail cam, but I did. And this time there was nothing. No clips between midnight and 3 a.m. The camera had been on. I double-checked the files, but it hadn't picked up anything. I stepped outside and walked toward the back, uneasy. That's when I saw the prints. Boot prints directly under the back window. Not old ones, not mine. They were fresh, pressed into the soft patch of dirt next to the foundation. I followed them a few feet and stopped. The pattern was the same on every print, heavy tread like work boots. They led toward the trees, then vanished where the hard ground began again. But the spacing, the direction, it all pointed to one thing. Whoever had stood there, outside my window, at the exact same angle as where he'd been in the footage. Same position, just closer each night. And last night, he'd finally gotten close enough to stand right beneath the window. Close enough to see me. I felt sick. It wasn't just some lost hiker. He wasn't trying to get help. He wasn't curious. He was watching me. For 3 nights in a row, he had been silently approaching, getting closer each time. And now he'd been right at the wall. I packed everything within an hour. I didn't eat, didn't clean up, just shoved my gear into the truck and left. I drove straight to the nearest town, found a gas station, and used their phone to call the sheriff's office. They sent a deputy out to meet me. I showed him the footage, the boot prints, told him everything. He didn't say much, just wrote it all down and said he'd send someone to check the cabin and the area. I gave them the trail cam, the SD card, everything. A few days later, I got a call. They said they hadn't found anyone. No signs of campsites, no discarded gear, no tire tracks nearby. Nothing. They said maybe it was a drifter or someone passing through. Nothing they could really do unless he came back or I had more footage. They offered to send someone if I ever returned to the cabin, but I never did. That was the last time I stayed somewhere that remote by myself. I still camp, still go out into the woods, but never alone anymore. And I never ignore trail cam footage again, because I don't know what that man wanted, why he was there, or what he planned to do the fourth night. But I didn't want to find out. I was visiting my cousin Matt, who lives just outside Portland, Oregon. It was early fall, one of those weeks where the weather still felt like summer during the day, but dropped cold at night. He had just moved into a place with his girlfriend, but she was out of town for the week, so it was just us hanging out like we used to as kids. I hadn't seen him in a while, and we spent the first day catching up, playing video games, making lazy sandwiches, and planning what to do with the rest of the week. On the second afternoon, after lunch, we got bored and decided to go for a bike ride. Matt told me about this old bike trail nearby, one that used to be popular years ago, but had been shut down when the city made a newer, safer path through the park system. The old trail was still technically there, but no one used it anymore. He said he'd only ever been on part of it a long time ago, but remembered it being creepy and quiet, completely overgrown in some areas. That sounded like a good way to kill the afternoon. We loaded our bikes in the back of his SUV and drove about 10 minutes out of town to where the trail started. The entrance was hard to spot. It was tucked between trees with a rusted metal gate that was half collapsed and leaning sideways. A broken trail closed sign still hung from one of the bars, faded and barely legible. We slipped around the side and started pedaling down the path. At first, it was kind of nice, peaceful, shaded, and cooler than I expected. It felt like we were the only people around for miles. The further we went, the worse the trail got. Cracked pavement, tree roots pushing through like veins. We had to get off our bikes a few times to lift them over fallen branches and one big log. It was clear no one had maintained this place in years. About 3 miles in, the trees opened up a bit, and we came to a low hill where the old road curved. A large concrete drainage tunnel sat just off the path, going underneath the hill. It was maybe 10 feet wide, with a trickle of water running down the middle. The entrance was wide open, no gate or bars or anything, just a dark mouth in the hillside. It wasn't completely dark inside. Sunlight stretched in maybe 20 or 30 feet, just enough that we could see the graffiti on the walls. But it wasn't what I expected. It wasn't colorful murals or even gang tags. It looked like someone had just been scraping metal along the concrete. Long vertical scratches, some deep, some faint. They crisscrossed, sometimes curving like a spiral, sometimes just messy and random. It gave me an uneasy feeling I couldn't quite explain, like something was off, even if I didn't know what. I stepped inside while Matt stayed by the bikes. The temperature dropped fast, and the air felt damp and stale. The concrete echoed slightly with each step, and the tunnel seemed to pull the sound in instead of letting it bounce back. About 10 feet in, I saw something piled up in the corner where the wall curved. From far away, it just looked like a bundle of rags or old clothes. But as I got closer, I realized it was more than that. There were jackets, a pair of jeans, an old backpack with one strap ripped, and near the bottom of the pile was what looked like a dirty, crusted sleeping bag. The color was hard to tell. It was stained all over, parts of it darker than others, like it had been sitting in that spot for years. I froze for a second, trying to figure out if maybe someone was living there. But the pile looked undisturbed, no recent footprints or food wrappers nearby, no signs of movement. Still, something felt wrong about it. I didn't want to touch anything with my hands, so I found a long stick near the entrance and nudged the sleeping bag. The second I touched it, a rat shot out from under the edge and ran along the tunnel wall. I jumped back hard, heart pounding. I could hear Matt behind me let out a startled yell. But it wasn't the rat that got to me. It was what I saw behind the sleeping bag, half hidden under it. A small metal box, like a tackle box you'd use for fishing. It was dull silver, rusted at the hinges. I stepped back in slowly and used the stick to drag it out into the light. I squatted down and carefully opened it. It wasn't locked. Inside were photographs, dozens of them, stuffed in there without any order. All Polaroids. Most of them were slightly bent at the corners, some had water damage. I pulled one out and stared at it. It was a picture of a woman sitting at a bus stop. She was looking at her phone, completely unaware. Another photo showed a teenage boy at a skate park, mid-jump on a board. A third showed a man sleeping on a bench downtown. The backgrounds looked familiar, all places in Portland. I flipped a few over. On the backs, there were dates written in black marker. Some were from over a year ago. Some were just months old. One of them was dated just 2 weeks ago. That's when I really felt it in my stomach, that tight, heavy weight that tells you something is seriously wrong. Whoever had taken these photos had been following people, watching them, taking pictures from a distance, secretly. And judging by how recent some of them were, they hadn't stopped. I didn't say anything. I didn't even want to speak out loud in that tunnel. I just picked up the box and walked back out toward Matt. He saw the look on my face and stopped talking. I showed him the photos. We didn't say a word. We just left the box on the ground, got on our bikes, and started riding. We didn't stop until we were back at his neighborhood. We didn't even look back once. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the photos again. I remembered the way the woman was sitting on the bench, totally relaxed, unaware. The boy with headphones on at the skate park. They didn't know someone had been watching them. Someone close enough to get those shots. Someone hiding. And whoever had been using that tunnel, or maybe just storing their stuff there. The box, the clothes, the scratches on the walls. It all pointed to someone who wasn't just passing through. It felt like a hideout, like a place they came back to. The next morning, I called the sheriff's office and reported what we found. I gave them the exact location, told them about the box, the photos, the clothing. They didn't say much, just said they'd send someone to check it out. I didn't hear back from them after that. 2 weeks later, Matt sent me a photo over text. It showed the tunnel entrance, completely sealed with fresh concrete. You could still see the outline of the original structure, but there was no way in anymore. Just a flat wall of gray cement, like it had never been opened. No news article ever came out. No investigation updates. No arrests. Nothing. But the thing that gets me, the thing that still messes with my head, is knowing that whoever took those photos wasn't found. They just sealed off the tunnel and moved on. That's it. Sometimes, when I'm walking home late or waiting alone at a bus stop, I can't help but look around. I check the shadows. I scan the rooftops and the alleys. Because someone out there likes watching. And now there's somewhere else. Somewhere new. Maybe even watching again. A few years ago, my boyfriend and I rented a small cabin up in northern Michigan for a long weekend. It was early October, right when the leaves start turning that deep orange and red, and everything smells like pine and wet earth. We both worked stressful jobs and wanted something completely quiet, away from people, phones, and everything else. The cabin was advertised as off-grid, which we thought sounded kind of charming. No cell service, no internet. Just the two of us, nature, and time to breathe. Getting there was weird from the start. There was only one road that led to it, just a narrow dirt path full of potholes and roots. You couldn't find it on Google Maps. We had to follow the owner's directions, which were printed out and included landmarks like turn left at the broken mailbox and go past the fallen tree. It felt like we were heading deeper and deeper into nowhere. By the time we pulled up to the cabin, the sun was starting to go down and there were no other houses or people in sight. Just thick woods on all sides. The cabin itself was nicer than I expected. Small but cozy, with a little kitchen, a wood-burning stove, and one bedroom. There was a front porch that looked out over the forest and a fire pit about 20 feet from the door. No TV, no radio, not even a landline. Just us. That first day was peaceful. We hiked a short trail that looped around the back of the cabin and ended up near a small stream. The air was crisp and smelled clean. We made dinner together and sat out on the porch with our jackets on, watching the stars come out. No light pollution at all. The sky was completely black, and you could see everything. More stars than I'd ever seen. It felt perfect, like we had picked the right place. But that night, I woke up around 2 or 3 in the morning. I didn't hear anything at first, just felt a bit off. The cabin was cold. I was reaching for the blanket when I heard it, a slow, crunching sound. Gravel, or maybe dry leaves, but steady, not an animal darting through the woods. It sounded like tires slowly rolling on gravel. I sat up and looked over at my boyfriend. He was still asleep. I got up quietly and walked to the front window. We had parked the car just off the dirt path that led to the cabin. I expected to see headlights or taillights, something, but there was nothing. Total darkness. I squinted, tried to let my eyes adjust, but there was nothing moving that I could see. After a few minutes, the sound stopped. I waited, heart beating a little faster, then went back to bed. I figured maybe it was a deer or something rustling through the leaves, and my tired brain just twisted it into something else. The next morning, I walked outside to get some air. That's when I saw them. Tire tracks, fresh ones, right there in the dirt. They came up the same road we had driven in on, curved slowly into our driveway, and stopped just a few feet from the bottom step of the porch. Then they turned around. Whoever it was had driven all the way up here in the middle of the night, pulled up close and left. No note, no knock on the door, nothing. I called out to my boyfriend, and he came out to look. We both stared at the tracks for a while without saying anything. It didn't make sense. No one should have been up here. That road only led to this one cabin. There were no other turnoffs or trails along the way. We hadn't seen a single other person since we arrived. Later that day, we decided to take another hike to get our minds off it. We picked a different direction this time, going off the main trail and deeper into the woods. About 10 minutes in, I noticed something odd near a tree. A small patch of disturbed leaves. Then I saw a cigarette butt, just one at first, then another. Then a few more, all in the same area, like someone had been standing there for a while, smoking and tossing them one by one. I crouched down and picked one up. It was fresh, not wet, not discolored. It had probably been dropped sometime in the last day. We stood there in silence, just looking at the ground. I felt this weird prickling on the back of my neck, like someone was watching us. It was suddenly quiet, no wind, no birds. We turned around and went back to the cabin without saying much. That night, we locked every door and window. Even though we hadn't seen anyone, it just felt wrong, like we weren't alone. I couldn't fall asleep. I kept staring at the ceiling, listening for anything. Branches snapping, footsteps, a car. Just after 3 in the morning, the motion sensor light on the porch turned on. I froze. The room filled with a soft glow from the front window. I didn't move. I couldn't even breathe for a second. My boyfriend sat up in bed. I saw him slowly get up and walk to the window. He pulled back the curtain just an inch. I watched him stand there for almost a full minute, then let the curtain fall back into place. He turned to me and shook his head. Nothing, he whispered, but I knew by the look on his face he wasn't sure. The light stayed on for maybe 30 seconds, then clicked off. Neither of us slept after that. We just lay there, staring at the ceiling, waiting for something else to happen. By dawn, we had made up our minds. We packed everything as quickly as we could and threw it all into the car. The sun was just starting to come up as we drove back down that narrow dirt road. I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone step out of the trees or a car pull out behind us. When we got back into cell range, we called the rental owner. She was polite but confused. She said no one else was supposed to be up there that week. No rangers, no deliveries, no other rentals in that area. She sounded just as unsettled as we were. We didn't report it. There wasn't really anything to report. No one had broken in. Nothing was stolen. We hadn't seen a face, hadn't caught a license plate. It was just whoever had come up there had done so on purpose. Not by accident. They had parked right by the front steps, stood out in the wood smoking, and had triggered the lights while staying just out of view. I still think about it sometimes. Wonder what they were doing there. Were they planning to come back a second night? Had they just been watching us? What would have happened if we had gone outside when the light turned on? If we'd ignored the tire tracks? If we had stayed one more night? I'm glad we didn't. We never went back. Two years ago, I moved into a cheap rental house in a small Pennsylvania town. I had just started working remotely full-time and needed a quiet place to focus. The house was old, really old. The kind with wooden floors that creaked even when you stood still, windows that whistled when the wind picked up, and radiator pipes that groaned randomly at night. But the rent was low, much lower than anything else I could find, and I needed space more than anything. The town was quiet, not much going on, just a few gas stations, a diner, and a post office. It felt like one of those places people forgot about, tucked away in the hills. The landlord was an older man, thin, wiry, wore a tan jacket that smelled like oil and dust. When I met him the day I moved in, he seemed like he couldn't hand me the keys fast enough. He gave me a short tour, barely said anything about the house, just pointed out the basics. Heater, fuse box where the trash goes. Then, when we reached a door near the kitchen, heavy, metal hinges and a big padlock, he paused. "Don't bother with it," he said. "Nothing down there but pipes and junk. I keep it locked to avoid accidents." It struck me as odd, sure, but I didn't say anything. I figured maybe the basement was unfinished, full of insulation and loose boards or something. I just nodded, and that was the end of it. He left, and I moved in. The first few weeks were uneventful. I worked during the day, made dinner, and watched TV or read at night. I didn't have any friends in town, and my family was hours away, so I mostly kept to myself. The house was quiet, and besides the occasional creaking from the old floorboards or the radiator kicking on, nothing fell off. I barely thought about the locked basement door. It was just part of the background, like an old painting you forget is hanging on the wall. Then one night, around 11 or so, while I was sitting on the couch watching TV with the volume low, I heard a loud thump from the floor beneath me. It wasn't a pipe or creaky board. It was heavy, like something big had fallen. It made me sit up straight. I paused the show and waited. Silence. I stared at the floor for a long time, trying to convince myself it was just something shifting down there. A loose shelf maybe, or a box toppling over from some old stack. But the padlock was still on the door. I checked it right after. Solid, no signs of tampering. I went to bed that night, trying to shake the feeling, but I kept waking up to every small sound, listening too closely. Over the next few nights, it happened again. Not every night, but enough that I started to dread the evenings. It was always late, always quiet beforehand. Then a sound would come, sometimes a scraping sound, sometimes a low thud like someone dragging something across the concrete floor. Once, I heard something that genuinely chilled me. It sounded like something being pulled slowly. Not fast, not hurried, just slow dragging. Like a piece of furniture being slid an inch at a time. But heavy, too heavy for one person. I stopped sleeping well. My work suffered. I'd spend hours lying in bed with my ears straining to catch the slightest noise. Sometimes I'd get up and press my ear to the basement door. That's when it got worse. One night, when I leaned close, I heard something behind the door. It wasn't movement this time. It was breathing. Not loud or panicked, slow, steady breathing. Like someone asleep or someone trying to stay quiet but couldn't help it. I stood there holding my own breath, listening. It didn't stop. I backed away slowly and locked myself in my bedroom. I didn't sleep at all that night. The next morning, I called the landlord. I told him there were noises coming from the basement, and I thought something might be wrong down there. Maybe an animal got in or a leak or something worse. He went silent for a few seconds, then said he'd come by the next day to check. That was it. No follow-up questions. Just, "I'll come by tomorrow." He never did. I waited all day, checked my phone repeatedly, looked out the window every hour. Nothing. He didn't call, didn't show up. That night, I couldn't take it anymore. I knew something was wrong down there. I couldn't keep pretending it was nothing. I needed to see for myself. I walked over to my neighbor's house, an older woman who lived alone with 2 dogs. Told her I had a padlock on my storage door that I lost the key to, and asked if she had bolt cutters I could borrow. She didn't ask too many questions, just handed them over and said to return them whenever. I waited until just before midnight. I don't know why I picked that time. Maybe I was just tired of being afraid. Maybe I figured if something was going to happen, I wanted to face it now rather than hear another night of breathing and dragging. I stood in front of the basement door with the bolt cutters in my hands, heart pounding. My palms were sweating so bad, I had to wipe them on my jeans before I could grip the handles. It took a few tries, but the padlock snapped. I pulled it off and opened the door slowly. It creaked the way you expect old wood to creak. The darkness beyond was complete. No light switch that I could see. I turned on my phone flashlight and aimed it down the stairs. The smell hit me first. Musty, thick, with a faint edge of something worse. Like rot, but not fresh. Just old. I stepped down slowly. The air felt heavier the further I went. Each step creaked under my weight, and I try not to imagine someone waiting at the bottom. The basement was small. Concrete floor, stone walls, pipes along the ceiling, rusted shelves leaning against the walls. Everything looked untouched. Old boxes, a broken lamp, some paint cans. But then my light landed on something in the back corner. A chain. It was bolted into the floor. A thick, rusted metal chain, like the kind you'd see in a warehouse or on a ship. Next to it was a mattress. Old, stained. The kind of stains that don't wash out, dark, irregular patches spread across the surface. A dirty pillow beside it, flattened and yellowed with age. Nearby was a camera tripod. No camera, just a stand. Its legs were extended, pointing toward the mattress. I don't know how long I stood there, just staring. My brain felt slow, like it was struggling to catch up with what I was seeing. This wasn't just storage. This wasn't some old junk. This was a setup. Someone had been kept down here. Not recently, but not that long ago either. The chain still looked strong. The mattress wasn't covered in dust like everything else. Someone had been here. Not years ago. Maybe months. Maybe weeks. I turned and ran. Back up the stairs, through the kitchen, out the front door. I left the lights on, the door open. I didn't care. I drove straight to a motel that night. Didn't even pack. The next day, I called the landlord and told him I was moving out. He didn't argue. Didn't even ask why. Just said okay and hung up. I moved out that same week. Left most of my stuff behind. I didn't want anything from that house. A few months later, while scrolling through the news on my phone, I saw an article from a local station. A man had been arrested for keeping someone captive in an abandoned farmhouse not far from the town, about 10 miles from where I used to live. The person had escaped somehow and led the police back. The article had a photo. It was the landlord. Same jacket, same face. They said it wasn't the first time he'd done it. He had a record going back decades. Charges dropped, never enough evidence. Until now, I sat there staring at the screen, hands shaking. I think about that basement all the time, about how close I was, about what could have happened if he'd decided I was asking too many questions, or if I hadn't opened the door when I did. I still hear those sounds sometimes when I'm lying in bed, the dragging, the breathing. I wonder if someone had been down there while I was living above them. Wonder if they ever heard me walking around, eating, sleeping, living my life while they were chained to that floor. I'll never rent another old house again. I don't care how cheap it is. Some doors are locked for a reason, but sometimes the reason is worse than you think. This happened back in 2016. I was 23 years old and had just started working remotely full-time. I've been dealing with a lot of stress, mostly from work and some stuff going on with my family. I felt like I was constantly around people, meetings, phone calls, messages at all hours. I needed a break, so I decided to rent a small cabin outside Asheville, North Carolina. I figured I could keep up with my work during the day and spend the rest of the time just unwinding in nature. No city noise, no neighbors, no distractions. The cabin was listed on a small rental site, not Airbnb or anything like that. It looked decent in the photos, wood-paneled walls, a small stone fireplace, a kitchen, a porch with a view of the woods. It was about a 25-minute drive from the nearest town, and I remember that the last 5 or 6 miles were just winding gravel roads. I stopped once on the way to let a herd of deer cross. There were no other cabins or houses in sight when I pulled up. Just tall trees, dense underbrush, and the quietest air I'd felt in years. When I got there on a Sunday afternoon, everything seemed perfect. The place smelled like cedar and old books. The bed was small but comfortable. The kitchen had what I needed. There was no Wi-Fi, but I had my hotspot. The first 2 days were peaceful. I worked from the dining table with the windows open, took long walks in the afternoon, and cooked simple meals at night. I didn't see another human being the entire time, which was exactly what I wanted. But on Wednesday night, something changed. I went to bed around midnight, after watching a movie on my laptop. I remember waking up suddenly around 2 a.m. I thought maybe I had heard something. I sat up and just listened. At first, there was nothing. Then I started hearing this soft, steady thumping. It wasn't loud, but it was unmistakable, like someone was gently knocking from underneath the floorboards. Not fast or frantic, just rhythmic. I sat still, trying to figure out what it could be. It didn't sound like an animal. I've lived in old houses and heard plenty of creaks and scurrying from mice or squirrels. This was different, almost like a pattern. I got out of bed and stood in the hallway, just listening. The sound stopped after maybe 10 seconds. I waited another few minutes, but everything was silent again. I told myself it was probably old pipes or the wood shifting from temperature changes. I went back to bed, but I kept waking up throughout the night. I felt uneasy. The next morning, I called the number listed for the cabin owner. I asked casually if there was a basement or crawl space. He told me there was a sealed crawl space under the cabin, but that it hadn't been opened in years. He said there was nothing down there but dirt and rocks. I didn't mention the noise. I felt stupid, like I was overthinking. Maybe I was just on edge because of how quiet it was. I tried to shake it off, but that night I heard the sound again. Around the same time, I was awake this time, lying in bed with the lights off. It started just after 2 a.m. The same soft, steady thumping, like someone was tapping a piece of wood against the floor from underneath. It went on a little longer this time. Maybe 15, 20 seconds. Then silence. Thursday morning, I went outside and walked around the cabin. The ground was damp from rain earlier in the week. I hadn't really paid much attention to the side of the house where the shrubs were thick. But as I pushed through them, I found a wooden door lying flat against the ground. It was covered by leaves and brush, but not completely hidden. There was a rusty padlock hanging on it. What caught my attention was the dirt around it. It looked disturbed, like someone had been crawling in or out recently. There were shallow scrapes in the earth and what looked like the imprint of a shoe. I stared at it for a long time. I didn't open it. I just stared and then went back inside. I locked the doors, pulled the curtains shut, and tried to focus on work. But I couldn't. I kept thinking about that sound, about the dirt around the crawl space door. I didn't call the owner again. I figured he wouldn't believe me. Or worse, he might think I was being dramatic or difficult. I also didn't want to sound like I was accusing him of anything. That night, I didn't even try to sleep. I turned off all the lights inside around 10 p.m., sat in the living room with a blanket, and held the biggest kitchen knife I could find. I didn't know what I expected to happen, but something in my gut told me to be ready. The fireplace was cold. The only light came from the moon through the windows. I sat on the couch, listening to every little creak and shift in the wood. At exactly 2:15 a.m., the thumping started again. Same pattern, same rhythm, but this time it felt closer, like it was directly beneath the living room. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely hear anything else. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside. The air was cold and wet, and the woods were dead quiet. When I reached the crawlspace door, I knew something was wrong. The padlock was hanging open, swinging slightly like it had just been touched. My flashlight beam caught the edge of the metal and reflected back at me. I hesitated, but something in me just snapped. I needed to know. I grabbed the edge of the door and pulled it open. It creaked loud, like it hadn't been moved in years. I shined a flashlight inside. The crawlspace was low, barely high enough for someone to crouch, and filled with damp dirt. The smell hit me immediately. It was moldy, old, and sharp like rotten food. In the back corner, I saw him. A man, crouched, wearing only a dirty hoodie and jeans. No shoes. His eyes were wide open and glassy, and he stared at me like a trapped animal. His hands were covered in dirt, and next to him was a small pile of trash, food wrappers, empty cans, plastic bottles. He didn't move. He just sat there, breathing heavily. I backed away slowly, not taking my eyes off him. I didn't know if he was dangerous or sick or scared. I slammed the crawlspace door shut and threw the padlock back on, even though I knew it probably wouldn't do much. Then I sprinted back in the cabin, locked every door and window, and called 911. The dispatcher told me officers were on the way, but it took almost an hour for them to arrive. I stayed on call the whole time. I sat on the floor with a knife in my hand, shaking. Every few minutes I thought I heard footsteps outside, but I didn't look. When the cops arrived, they went straight to the crawl space. He was still there. He didn't run, just sat quietly while they pulled him out. I watched from the window as they led him to the squad car. He looked small, tired, like someone who hadn't had human contact in a long time. Later, one of the officers told me that the man was a local. He'd been homeless for a while and had been sneaking into crawl spaces and cabins across the county, living off whatever food he could steal. He'd wait for guests to leave during the day, break in through unlocked windows, take small things, cans, snacks, bottled water, and go back into hiding. He wasn't violent, just desperate. But still, the thought that he'd been under the floor while I was sleeping made my skin crawl. I packed up and left the next morning. Didn't even finish the week. I drove straight home and never looked back. Since then, I haven't rented a remote cabin again. No matter how peaceful the photos look, I can't shake the feeling that someone could be just beneath your feet, watching, waiting, listening. I rented a small cabin in Colorado during the fall of 2023. I was burnt out from work, from people, from city noise, and constant notifications. I needed silence. I wanted to write again, clear my head, maybe even get a full night's sleep for once. I found a listing through a forum for remote writers. Someone had posted a link, said it was perfect for working in solitude. No Wi-Fi, no cell signal, no neighbors, just a small one-room cabin with a kitchen, a bathroom, and a fireplace. It looked old but clean, surrounded by tall pine trees and rocky hills in the distance. It seemed like the exact kind of place I needed. When I got there, it was already late afternoon. The dirt road that led to the cabin was narrow and bumpy, about 20 minutes off the main road. I passed no other houses on the way, just woods and more woods. When I pulled up, the place looked almost exactly like the photos. Wooden, weathered, with a single front porch light and a rusty metal roof. There was a small shed a few feet away that looked locked, and a fire pit beside the porch with a few old logs stacked nearby. I unlocked the door using the code the owner sent me and stepped in. Inside, it smelled faintly of wood and something like dry earth. There was a small table and 2 chairs near the window, a little kitchenette with a sink and a propane stove, and a narrow bed pushed against the wall opposite a fireplace. Everything was basic but clean. I checked the bathroom too, just a toilet, a small sink, and a shower stall with a curtain. I unpacked my stuff, made a quick meal from a can of chili, and started scribbling some notes for a story. That first night was peaceful. I fell asleep listening to wind in the trees and the soft creaking of the old wood around me. The second day is when I started to notice something strange. I was brushing my teeth in the bathroom that morning when I noticed a mirror. It was small and square, bolted above the sink with a thick wooden frame that didn't quite match the rest of the bathroom. It looked off. The glass was slightly tinted, almost like sunglasses. Not enough to notice right away, but enough to make my reflection seem a little darker, a little dimmer. I leaned in closer, thinking maybe it was just old glass. I tapped on it lightly with my knuckle. There was a slight echo. Not loud, but not normal either. It didn't sound solid. It sounded like there was space behind it. That weirded me out. I touched around the frame, pressed gently against it, and it shifted just slightly, like it wasn't completely flush with the wall. I didn't do anything else then. Just made a mental note and tried to brush it off as an old cabin quirk. But it stayed on my mind all day. I couldn't focus on writing. I kept glancing toward the bathroom. I kept hearing tiny creaks in the walls, and every now and then, I felt like I wasn't really alone. Not in a supernatural way, just like someone was nearby, watching, listening. That night, I hardly slept. I kept hearing soft sounds. Nothing dramatic, just light creaks like floorboards settling, but different, more deliberate. Once I swore, I heard a quiet thump, like something falling lightly onto wood. I sat up in bed and listened for a long time, but nothing else happened. I told myself it was just the old cabin making noise. Wind, mice, maybe raccoons outside. I wrapped myself in the blanket and waited for morning. By the third day, I couldn't ignore it anymore. I went back into the bathroom and stared at the mirror. I don't know what pushed me over the edge, maybe the lack of sleep, maybe the constant feeling of being watched, but I grabbed a screwdriver from my backpack and started unscrewing the frame. It came off easily. The wood wasn't even properly secured. When I pulled it away, the mirror shifted, and behind it was a hole. It wasn't a hole in the wall like damage or rot. It was a rectangular opening, just wide enough for someone to crawl through. Behind the mirror was a crawl space, dark, maybe 3 feet deep before it bent sharply to the right into darkness. There was a smell coming out of it, not strong, but human. Stale, unwashed, like a room that hadn't been aired in months. My flashlight was in my backpack, so I grabbed it and aimed it into the space. That's when I saw it. Inside, pushed up against the side of the opening, was a small wooden stool. Crumpled snack wrappers were scattered around. Cheap gas station stuff. Chips, candy, granola bars. A plastic bottle of water lay on its side, half full. The stool was positioned just under where the mirror would have been. If someone sat there, they could have looked straight through the tinted glass, watching the bathroom. Watching me. For how long? I didn't know. But it hadn't been just a dead space behind the wall. Someone had been in there. I didn't even hesitate. I backed out of the bathroom, grabbed my backpack, and tossed everything inside without folding or checking. I stuffed my laptop, charger, flashlight, food, everything. I slammed the front door behind me, didn't bother locking it, and got in my car. I reversed too fast down that bumpy dirt road, heart pounding, eyes darting toward the cabin in my mirror. I half expected someone to come crawling out the front door, but no one did. When I hit the main road, I drove straight to a gas station about 30 minutes away and sat in the car with the engine running. I didn't want to go inside. I didn't want to explain anything to anyone. I messaged the cabin owner using the booking site and said I had an emergency. I told them I needed to leave early and asked if they could cancel the rest of the reservation. I never heard back. No reply. Not even a seen notification. A few days later, when I was back home, I tried to check the listing again. I wanted to see if anyone else had reviewed it or mentioned anything weird, but the listing was gone. Completely. It didn't show up in my bookmarks. I even searched the website directly. Nothing. It was like it never existed. I checked my inbox to find the original messages and booking details. Everything was gone. My message thread was blank. No record of me booking that cabin. No host profile. It was wiped clean. I don't know what happened. I don't know if it was some kind of scam, if I was being watched by a squatter, or if the owner knew and was hiding it. I tried to report it to the site, but without a link, without a message thread, there wasn't much I could say. I couldn't even remember the exact address. Just somewhere in Colorado, off Highway 24, near the edge of a national forest. That's not enough for police or anyone else to do anything with. But I know what I saw. I know someone had been in that crawl space. Someone had been sitting on that stool, watching me through that mirror. And they were close. Close enough to hear me move, to hear me breathe. I think about it sometimes. What if I had stayed another night? What if I hadn't looked behind the mirror? What if they had decided to come out? I don't rent remote cabins anymore. I don't travel alone if I can help it. And I always check behind the mirrors. We have been hiking for a few days already, deep in the northern Maine woods. Me and my cousin Nate had planned this trip for months. We both like going off trail, way off trail, where the GPS starts to lose its mind and cell signal disappears completely. We like the silence, the lack of people, the feeling of being completely out there where no one would just stumble upon you. We packed light, just enough to camp, fish, and hike for a week. No distractions, no noise, just the two of us and endless trees. That day, we'd wandered off even farther than usual. We were moving through some thick forest when we noticed something strange about the ground ahead. It wasn't natural. The trees thinned out just enough for sunlight to hit something gray and flat. When we got closer, we realized it was concrete. A solid slab, wide, and partly covered with moss and leaves, like it had been there a long time. It didn't belong. You don't see stuff like that in the middle of nowhere unless it was put there for a reason. At first, I thought it might be part of some old logging station or ranger building, but there were no markings, no signs, nothing. Toward one end of the slab was a square metal door, maybe 5 feet wide. Thick hinges, thick frame. It looked like something from a submarine. It was slightly open, just enough for cold air to flow out from the gap. It was weirdly cold, the kind of cold that didn't match the warm, humid air outside. I remember just standing there, staring at it. It looked heavy, but there was no sign it had been forced open. There was no lock, no chain, no signs of entry. Just cracked open like it was waiting, We looked at each other, but no one said anything. Just acted like we both silently agreed that we were going in. That's the kind of dumb curiosity you get when you're out in the woods too long, where strange things become challenges, not warnings. The entrance led straight to a concrete stairwell that disappeared into blackness. No handrails, no lights, just thick stairs that dropped steeply into the earth. The cold air got stronger the lower we stepped. 5, maybe 6 steps in, and you could feel in your bones. Like walking into a meat locker. Still, no smell, no trash, no graffiti, no signs that anyone had ever been there. That was what unsettled me the most. Even in remote places, you always find a beer can or a broken bottle, initials scratched into cement. But this place was silent, untouched. Then it happened. We both heard it at the same time. A sound from below, metal dragging slowly across concrete. Not a clank, not a bang. A long, steady scraping, like something heavy being pulled or pushed. It came from deep inside, maybe down another set of stairs or further into the structure. I stopped breathing for a second, just listening, straining my ears. I wanted to believe it was an animal, but no animal makes that sound. No animal drags solid metal across a floor. I didn't even want to find out what could. We turned around fast and ran. Didn't even talk, just ran. Up the steps, through the open door, back into the woods. We didn't stop until we were halfway back to camp, completely out of breath and dripping in sweat. We didn't say a word until we got there. The rest of that day we stayed close to camp, didn't explore, didn't fish, didn't hike. Just sat around the fire, listening to the woods, not looking at each other too much. Neither of us brought up what we heard. I think both of us were trying to convince ourselves it was something explainable. A weird echo. A falling pipe, maybe some collapsing piece of metal. Anything. The next morning, we both woke up early. I didn't sleep well that night. Every sound in the forest sounded wrong, like something was off. Nate was already sitting outside when I came out of the tent. He looked like he hadn't slept either. Without saying anything, we both packed our bags for the day and decided to try and find that place again. It was stupid, I know, but something about it didn't sit right. We needed to see it in the daylight. To make sense of it, we spent hours retracing our steps. We were sure we knew the path. The forest wasn't that complicated. We even left small markers, scratches on trees, just in case we got turned around. But nothing looked familiar. We found similar clearings, similar mossy ground, even some places where it felt close, but that concrete slab, that metal door was gone. We spent the whole day searching and never found it again. That night, back at camp, we sat in silence for a long time. Finally, Nate pulled out his phone and started digging through old offline maps he downloaded, trying to see if anything was marked around where we thought we were. There was nothing, just blank forest. Later, after the trip, we both did more digging. Forums, archive sites, local records. That's when I came across some declassified documents mentioning Cold War-era bunkers scattered throughout northern Maine, test facilities, emergency shelters, storage vaults. Most of them were either demolished or sealed and buried. A lot of them were never officially mapped. Some weren't even finished, built into hillsides or buried in concrete, then forgotten. No one was monitoring them. No one was supposed to be inside them. Whatever we found wasn't meant to be found. I kept thinking about the dragging sound, the clean concrete, the cold air. It wasn't a place for people to live, not comfortably. It felt more like storage, maybe even detention. I don't know, but something was still active down there, or someone. And if they were still inside, it wasn't by accident. That place hadn't been touched in decades, but something down there was still moving. We never told anyone beyond a few close friends. And even then, we left out parts. We made it sound less serious, like just a weird ruin we stumbled into. I think neither of us wanted people to actually go looking for it. Some places should stay buried. There's a reason they're left off maps. I still wonder what we would have seen if we had gone all the way down, but I'm glad we didn't. Whatever was down, there wasn't meant for us. We never went back to that part of the woods again. Even when we went hiking months later, we stuck to known trails. We kept to places other people walked. That trip changed something. It showed us how easy it was to disappear out there, how many secrets the forest can hold just beneath the surface, and how close we came to stepping into one of them. We had planned the trip for months. It was our anniversary, and my wife and I wanted to do something a little different. Something quiet, away from people, just us and nature. So we booked a campsite about 3 hours away from home, a wooded area in the hills that was supposed to be peaceful and beautiful in mid-June. We packed everything carefully: the tent, sleeping bags, camp stove, cooler, food supplies, everything we thought we might need for a week in the woods. I even packed a couple of thick ribeye steaks for the night of our anniversary. The forecast looked decent enough, just a bit of rain midweek, but nothing we couldn't handle. We arrived on a Saturday afternoon. The drive was smooth, no issues. We checked in at the little ranger station near the entrance to the campground. There was a piece of paper taped to the door with a printed warning: bear activity reported. Please secure all food and scented items. That was it, just a warning. I shrugged it off at first. Bears are always a risk in places like this. We were planning on doing everything right. Keeping the food in the car, no snacks left out, no toothpaste or soap inside the tent. I thought we'd be fine. What I didn't expect was that the bear wasn't just wandering through the woods. It was visiting our campsite like it was on a schedule. By the time we got everything set up, it was close to evening. We cooked a simple dinner, locked the cooler in the car, zipped up the tent, and tried to enjoy the quiet. Around 10 p.m., we were sitting near the fire when we heard something in the woods. Crunching leaves, heavy, slow steps. Then we saw it, a large black bear, not more than 30 feet away, just past the edge of the firelight. It didn't seem scared of us at all. It just moved through the trees, turned directly toward our campsite, and walked in like it owned the place. My wife froze. I stood up, trying to look big, heart pounding, but didn't move otherwise. The bear sniffed around near where the cooler had been, maybe expecting food. After a minute or two, it wandered off back into the trees. That night, we slept in the car. No way were we sleeping in the tent with a bear nearby. The car wasn't comfortable. It was cramped, hot at first, then freezing around 3 a.m. We barely slept. The next morning, I walked down to the ranger station to report the bear and ask if we could move to another site. There were a bunch of other empty spots, but the guy just told me we're aware of the situation and something vague about the bear being non-aggressive. I didn't push it. I should have, but I didn't. That night, we tried to be braver. We sat out by the fire again, a little more nervous this time. And just like before, almost like it was on a loop, the bear showed up again around the same time, same path, same direct line into our sight. Again, we locked ourselves in the car and waited until it left. We told ourselves maybe it wouldn't come back the next day. We clung to the idea that it had just been passing through. But the way it walked into our sight so specifically made it clear it knew this spot. Maybe it had found food here before. It was too familiar. Tuesday was our anniversary. It started raining in the morning. At first, it wasn't too bad, just a light drizzle. We figured we'd stay inside the car, read, nap, maybe drive into town later. By the afternoon, it was pouring steadily. The ground turned to mud, and the tent was soaked through. Everything smelled wet. My shoes were damp. We didn't feel like cooking in the rain, so we drove into town and ate dinner at a hotel restaurant. Far from the romantic steak and fire evening I'd imagined. We went back to the campsite, got into the car, and tried to sleep again. I woke up early Wednesday morning. It was still raining, hard enough that I could hear it hammering the roof of the car. My toe felt like someone had stabbed it. I shifted around in the back seat, hoping it was just cramped or maybe I'd bumped it in my sleep. But the pain only got worse. I looked down and saw that the joint was red, swollen, and throbbing. I couldn't bend it. Even touching it lightly sent a jolt of pain up my leg. I got out of the car and limped through the rain toward the bathroom building. I thought walking it off might help. I sat on the covered bench outside the bathrooms, dripping wet, toe pulsing, and took out my phone. I had 1 bar of signal and 1 voicemail. I didn't recognize the number at first, but when I played it, my stomach dropped. It was my stepmother. She said she'd taken my dad to the emergency room late the night before. He'd been having back pain for weeks, but it had gotten worse, and now they were worried it might be cancer. She didn't know anything else yet, just that he'd been admitted and they were running tests. I sat there in the rain, shivering, toe throbbing, listening to that message again and again. I didn't know what to do. I didn't even wake my wife right away. I just sat there, staring at the wall of trees behind the bathroom, everything gray and wet and miserable. I didn't want to cry, but I felt sick, like everything was wrong at once. Eventually, I hobbled back to the car and told my wife what was going on. She helped me pack up some of our stuff, and we drove into town to find an urgent care. They squeezed me in, looked at the toe, and said it was an infection, gave me antibiotics, and told me to rest and keep my foot elevated. But I couldn't walk without limping, and everything hurt. We went back to the campsite and just sat in the car for a while. I don't even remember talking. We were both silent. The rain kept falling. By that evening, we'd had enough. The bear, the rain, the pain, and now my dad possibly having cancer. It was too much. We packed everything up, even though most of it was wet, shoved the soaked tent into the trunk, piled muddy gear into the back seat. Didn't even bother trying to clean it off. We just wanted to leave. We started the long drive home late that night. My wife offered to drive, and I leaned the seat back and tried not to move my foot. The drive was long. The pain in my toe didn't let up. Every bump in the road felt like a jab of fire through my leg. We made it home the next morning, exhausted, sore, and emotionally drained. I went to my regular doctor a few days later, and that's when they told me it wasn't an infection, it was gout. I never had it before. Apparently, it can show up out of nowhere, and it just happened to pick that week. Perfect timing. My dad's test results came in a few days after he got home. It wasn't good. They found cancer in his spine, and he had to start treatment right away. That news hit harder than anything else. Everything else from that trip, every soaked sock, every hour spent curled in the back of the car, every time the bear walked into our sight, faded into the background after that. None of it mattered in comparison. We haven't gone camping since. We still talk about it sometimes, but it's always with a kind of bitter laugh. Our anniversary trip that turned into a slow-motion disaster. A bear that kept visiting like it was punching a time clock. Days of rain that soaked everything we owned. A foot that swelled up and wouldn't let me walk. And a phone call that changed the entire mood of our lives for weeks to come. It was supposed to be a quiet, relaxing getaway. A break from routine. Time for just the two of us. Instead, it became the worst trip we've ever had, and maybe the most unforgettable. I've grown up hearing this story from my dad, usually late at night, usually after he'd had a long day and was feeling a little looser than usual. He never volunteered the story, not unless someone else brought it up or I specifically asked. And when he did tell it, he didn't embellish. He didn't add dramatic flair or raise his voice for effect. He spoke flat, almost cautious, like just saying it out loud still made him uncomfortable after all these years. My dad's not the type to get rattled. He's a preacher's son, raised strict and steady. He doesn't believe in ghosts or spirits or anything paranormal. He doesn't even watch horror movies. Too ridiculous, he says. But this story, this thing that happened back in the late 80s when he was a young guy out in the woods with his friends, he says it still sits with him like a weight he can't shake. Back then, my dad and a group of his buddies would hike through the woods behind our old family farm. There was a creek bed and a waterfall that cut through the trees. And from there, you could follow old animal trails that led all the way up to the frontage road that ran alongside the interstate. They knew those woods better than most people know their own backyards. It wasn't unusual for them to spend whole nights hiking just to clear their heads, burn off energy, or get away from town for a while. One night, they decided to change it up. Instead of sticking to their usual route, they looped around the back of a neighboring farm. The owner had emus and a few other exotic animals, stuff he didn't see much around our parts, and the guys figured they'd swing by to check them out from a distance. After that, they headed deeper into the woods, further than they normally went, just to explore. It was already dark by then. They all had flashlights, but this was before LED lights and smartphone flashlights. These were old, clunky things that barely lit more than a few feet ahead, especially under the thick tree cover. They weren't scared though, not yet. They were just a bunch of bored, curious 20-somethings looking for something different. They'd gone maybe another mile past the farm when they found it. The house. From what I've been told by my dad and later by each of the other guys separately, it was old. Not just weathered, but abandoned for decades kind of old. The boards were gray and warped. The roof sagged. Parts of the front porch were caved in. But what really stuck with all of them was how out of place it felt. There were no trails leading to it, no overgrown driveways or fences. It just sat there, deep in the woods, like it had been dropped in by accident, or like the forest had grown around it and swallowed it whole. My dad said he felt something wrong the second he saw it. Not a fear, exactly, but a pressure, a heaviness. Something about the way the trees stood around it, the way the air felt still and thick, like the woods were holding their breath. Still, they went in. Of course they did. The front door wasn't even closed all the way. They pushed it open and stepped inside, one by one. The air was cold, not freezing, but colder than it should have been for a summer night in the South. The inside was surprisingly intact. Dusty, cobwebbed, but not vandalized or destroyed. The furniture was old, cottage style, probably from the 40s or 50s. Torn curtains hung limp from the windows. A few chairs, a sofa, an empty bookshelf. But what caught their attention were the markings. They were everywhere. Symbols scrawled in thick strokes on the walls, the floors, even the ceilings. Some were painted, some carved, some looked like they'd been drawn in something darker, possibly blood. My dad says he knew the difference. He'd seen enough real blood from his years working accident scenes as a volunteer firefighter. And what he saw on those walls, it had that brown, rusty tint, that smell, like iron and rot. The symbols weren't just shapes either. There were words, some in English, most in what looked like Latin or Greek. Phrases that mentioned rituals, sacrifices, offerings, names of things they didn't recognize. Some of it was childish, clearly graffiti sprayed by someone who'd thought it was cool. But other parts, there was something serious about them. Careful, precise. One wall had a full passage written on it about binding the soul, calling something forward, offering flesh. It was all too much. They made their way through the main room and into a small kitchen area, then found a stairwell that led to the second floor. It was tight, too tight for comfort. My dad said his shoulders brushed both sides as he walked up. The stairs went straight, then hit a small landing and turned right. You couldn't see the top until you were almost there. He says the air was thicker upstairs, warmer, somehow, and filled with a smell he couldn't place. Old meat, maybe, something organic and wrong. The room at the top was large and shaped like an attic. Sloped ceiling, wooden floors, a circular window at the far end. And along one wall, hanging from metal hooks drilled directly into the wood, were chains. Not just chains, but manacles. Restraints with locks, big enough to hold someone in place. There were more symbols up here, more dried stains. The wood was warped and darkened in places like it had soaked up something wet long ago. They spread out to look around, the nerves finally starting to catch up with them. One of the guys, Kevin I think, said something about how this was too weird and they should leave. Just then they heard it. Footsteps, heavy and fast, coming up the stairs. Loud enough that they all froze. My dad says he remembers feeling his chest go tight, like something had wrapped around his lungs. The footsteps reached the landing and then stopped. They turned, expecting someone to be standing at the top of the stairs. But no one was there. They rushed down, thinking someone was screwing with them, but the dust on the floor showed only their own footprints. Nothing else. That should have been enough to send them running, but they kept trying to make sense of it. They walked outside and decided to find their way home a different way, just to shake it off. They pulled out their compass and headed east, figuring they'd loop around and avoid the way they came. But every single time, they ended up back in front of the house. They tried at least 10 different routes. Northwest, straight south, zigzagging through the brush. Each time, no matter how far or how straight they walked, they ended up standing at the front porch of that house again. It didn't make sense. They all knew those woods, grew up in them. There was no way they were looping without realizing it. They were using a compass, for God's sake. Eventually, one of the guys started feeling dizzy, feverish. Another was short of breath. They all felt nauseous, like the air was too thick, too heavy. They agreed to leave. Finally, as they turned to go, one of them, Daniel, looked back. She was in the window. That's what he said. That's what all of them said. Later, when I asked each of them on their own. A woman, or a woman-shaped figure. Tall, too tall. Thin. Her back was hunched. Her face pale, except for two dark eyes that looked too big for her head. No mouth, no nose that they could see. Just those eyes, staring. She moved. Just a shift at first, a shuffle. Then she turned and walked out of sight toward the stairwell. That was it. They ran. Full sprint through the woods until they hit the interstate and flagged down a passing trucker. They got dropped off a few miles from the farm and walked the rest of the way home, too scared to talk. Even then, they felt like someone was following them, watching. My dad's cousin swore he saw her again, outside the kitchen window, standing just at the edge of the woods. They tried to tell themselves it was their minds playing tricks, that the house was just a place where bored teenagers had messed around, and the symbols were leftovers from some failed horror show. They never went back, at least not for years. 5 years later, they made the trip out to see if the place was still there. It wasn't. The house had collapsed. Nothing but rubble, half-rotted beams, and broken stone. Nature had swallowed it, or something else had. My dad never talked about it much after that. And when he did, you could see it in his face, something in his eyes that was different. I always begged him to let me try to find it, just once, but he'd just shake his head. He'd never say no outright. He didn't need to. You could feel the answer in the way he refused to even think about it. I don't know what it was. Maybe they did get turned around. Maybe the air was bad in that house, some kind of mold or rot that made them sick and hallucinate. Maybe they were just caught up in the moment, a bunch of young guys scaring themselves. But if you could see their faces when they tell the story, if you could hear how their voices drop and their hands fidget, you'd think twice about writing it off. I used to laugh it off, but now, I'm not so sure. Something was in those woods. And whatever it was real enough to haunt 5 grown men for the rest of their lives. I went camping alone last summer in northern Idaho, near the St. Joe River. I had been planning it for weeks, just me, a tent, a fishing rod, and a few days in complete silence. No one else, no phone signal, no distractions. I found the spot through a random blog post, some backwoods pull-off that wasn't on any official camping maps. That was exactly what I wanted. No campsites, no fire rings, no RVs. Just woods and water. I drove out early in the morning. The last hour of the drive was all dirt road, washed out in places, steep in others. My car struggled a bit, but I made it. The area was beautiful. Tall pine trees, thick underbrush, and the sound of the river not far off. I parked my car just off the road, near a small clearing that was mostly flat. That was going to be my base. I set up my tent in the middle of the clearing, just enough distance from the trees, but close enough for some shade. Then I walked around for a bit to get a feel for the place. There was a narrow trail leading down to the river. The water was shallow but fast, running over smooth stones. I filled up my water filter, splashed my face, then sat for a while just listening. No cars, no voices, just birds and wind and water. It was perfect. Back at camp, I started a small fire. I cooked a can of chili and ate it slowly while the sun dipped behind the trees. By then, the shadows were stretching out and the air was cooling fast. I crawled in my tent around 9:30. I had a flashlight, but I didn't use it much. I like how dark it got out there. It made things feel more real. I read for a bit with my headlamp on, then turned it off and tried to sleep. It was hard at first. My mind kept bouncing around. Every little sound outside made me pause, twigs snapping, rustling in the brush, something dripping near the trees. It wasn't fear exactly, just awareness. I was completely alone, no one within miles. That thought sat heavy in my chest, but eventually I drifted off. I woke up a few times during the night, once to the sound of something walking through the brush. It wasn't close, but it wasn't far either. I laid there, holding my breath, waiting to hear it again. It came again, light, slow crunches. Whatever it wasn't in a hurry. After a few minutes, it faded away. Probably a deer, I told myself. Still, I kept my knife close to me in the tent. The next day was calm. I fished a little, caught 2 small trout, and fried them up for lunch. I walked a few miles upstream and saw no one. Not a single boot print or broken branch or candy wrapper. It was like the forest hadn't seen people in months. That night, same routine. Fire, food, early to bed. But this time, I couldn't sleep. I laid there for hours, just staring at the top of the tent. Something fell off. I couldn't explain it, just a pressure in my chest like I was being watched. I kept sitting up and looking out the mesh, but I saw nothing. I told myself it was just nerves, that I wasn't used to this level of quiet. Around 3 a.m., I heard something again, this time closer. A clear footstep, then another. Not a deer, not a raccoon, heavier. I sat up and reached for my flashlight, clicked it on, and shined it through the mesh. Nothing. The forest was just trees and blackness. But the sound had stopped. I waited. 5 minutes. 10. Then I heard it again, behind the tent. I turned quickly, the light sweeping through the back. Still nothing. But I knew what I'd heard. A person, 2 feet, walking. I sat there the rest of the night, gripping my knife and flashlight, jumping at every sound. Dawn came slowly, and when it did, I unzipped the tent and stepped out, half expecting to see someone nearby. But the clearing was empty. I walked the edge of it, checking the brush. No footprints. Nothing broken. Nothing moved. I went down to the river. Same thing. Nothing out of place. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling. I considered packing up, but I told myself I was being paranoid. It was possible the sounds had just been my imagination or some animal with an odd gait. I stayed. Day 3 was warm. I wandered farther downstream and found a good rock to sit on. I didn't fish. I just sat there for hours, trying to relax. I returned to camp early, made dinner, and had a small fire again. But I didn't feel the same. I kept checking the trees, scanning the distance. When I finally got in the tent that night, I didn't bother trying to sleep. I laid there with my flashlight in one hand, my knife in the other, just listening. Around 1 a.m., I heard again. The footfalls. Same as before, slow, deliberate. I froze. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might give me away. Then I saw a shape, just past the trees on the far side of the clearing. A dark figure, standing completely still. I clicked on a flashlight and aimed it right at him, but it was just out of range. I could see the shape of a person, but not the face. No details, just standing there, not moving. I waited. The figure didn't move. I sat like that for 15 minutes, light aimed straight at it. Then, just as quietly as it came, it was gone. I don't know when. I must have blinked or looked away for a second. But when I looked back, the spot was empty. The shape was gone. I didn't sleep. I stayed awake until sunrise. As soon as there was enough light, I got out and scanned the tree line. Nothing. I walked over to where I saw the figure. The grass was flattened. Not a lot, just a spot where someone had stood. I checked around. A few broken twigs nearby. One that looked recent, green with still exposed. That was enough for me. I packed up camp in 15 minutes flat. I didn't eat, didn't even roll up the tent properly. I just shoved everything in the trunk and left. The dirt road felt longer on the way out. Every curve I expected to see someone, maybe standing in the trees, watching. I didn't stop driving until I was 2 hours from a forest, at a gas station with bright lights and people. I sat in my car for 10 minutes before I even got out. I was shaking, not from cold, just from the stress of it all catching up. I still don't know who that was or what they wanted. Could have been some drifter. Could have been some local messing with me. But they never approached, never spoke, never tried to break in. They just watched. And the part that sticks with me the most, how quiet they were. Careful, like they'd done it before. I haven't been camping since. Not alone, and I don't think I ever will again. I was driving alone late at night, coming back from a weekend camping trip out near the old quarry lands. It had been a quiet trip, just me, my gear, and a tent in the woods. I liked it that way. No people, no distractions, no phone buzzing every few minutes. But once I packed up and got on the road, I realized just how isolated that place really was. No signal, no towns, no streetlights. Just endless stretches of gravel and dirt roads, cutting through thick forest and rocky hills. The kind of place where even your headlights feel swallowed up by the dark. It must have been close to midnight. The air outside was heavy, humid, and the only sound I could hear over the hum of my engine was the occasional clatter of gravel under the tires. I had the windows cracked a little, hoping the cool night air would keep me awake. I was maybe an hour from the nearest highway, but the road was winding and rough. Just dirt, packed down by years of logging trucks, and maybe the odd hunter or ranger now and then. As I rounded a bend near an old turnout that overlooked the quarry, my headlights swept across a shape on the side of the road. A man, standing just off his shoulder, not moving. His clothes looked dusty, like he'd been walking for a long time. Faded jeans, a gray jacket, something slung over his shoulder that I couldn't make out clearly. He had one arm out, thumb sticking up. Hitchhiking. I slowed down. Just instinct, I guess. You see someone like that in the middle of nowhere, your first reaction is to help. But the closer I got, the more uneasy I felt. There was something wrong about him. He wasn't looking at me. He stood completely still, facing the ground, like he was staring at the dirt just in front of his feet. The way his body was positioned, it didn't even feel like he was waiting for a ride. It was almost like he was just there, like a statue someone had dropped in the middle of the woods. My foot hovered over the brake for a second. Something in my gut said no. Not just hesitation, real heavy dread. So I kept going. I drove past without stopping. As I rolled by, I glanced in my rearview mirror. He had turned his head, and now he was staring directly at me. His face was pale, thin, but not shocked or sad or hopeful like you'd expect from someone trying to hitch a ride. He looked angry, cold, not yelling or chasing or anything, just standing there, his eyes locked onto my car like he was memorizing the license plate. Like he knew me, like he wanted me to stop, and was pissed that I didn't. I kept my foot steady on the gas, trying not to speed too much on the narrow road. The trees pressed in tighter here, the branches hanging low like they were leaning over to listen. The air in the car felt heavier, thicker, like it was harder to breathe. I told myself he was just some drifter, maybe someone who lived off the grid. But that stare, it rattled me. There was no panic in it, just a weird, sharp awareness. About 10 minutes later, I was coming around a blind curve when a deer jumped out onto the road. I hit the brakes hard, tires skidding a little on the loose gravel. The deer bolted across and disappeared into the woods. I was still catching my breath, heart thudding in my chest. When I looked up, there he was. That same man, standing in the middle of the road, just 20 or 30 feet ahead. My headlights hit him dead on this time. He was facing me now, completely still. Same clothes, same stance. But this time he wasn't hitchhiking. He wasn't doing anything. Just standing there in the center of the road, staring straight at me. My body went cold. I didn't even think. I yanked the wheel and swerved hard to the right, nearly going off the edge of the shoulder. Gravel sprayed out from under the tires. I felt the back end of the car fishtail slightly, but managed to keep control. I slammed the gas and didn't look back. I drove faster than I should have. Every curve felt tighter, every shadow in the woods deeper. I didn't slow down until I hit the pavement of the highway. The second my tires touched asphalt, I felt something in my chest unclench. I didn't stop until I reached a 24-hour gas station about 30 miles out. I sat there in the lot for a while, engine still running, hands gripping the wheel tighter than I realized. My palms were slick with sweat. I didn't tell anyone at first. What would I say? That I saw a guy hitchhiking and then saw him again, somehow miles down the road? That I felt like he knew me, like he wanted something from me? People would say I was overtired or imagining things after a long weekend alone in the woods. But something about it stuck with me. The look in his eyes, the way he appeared in the road like that. It didn't make sense. And no matter how much I tried to brush it off, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had driven past something I wasn't supposed to see. It was 3 days later when I got the full story. I was back home by then, scrolling through local news sites while drinking coffee. That's when I saw the headline. Prison transport crash near Quarry Road. One inmate still at large. I clicked on it. The article said a transport van carrying 2 prisoners had flipped near the quarry entrance 4 nights ago, the same night I was out there. One inmate had been caught the next morning not far from the crash. The other had escaped into the woods. Still missing. They posted a photo of the escapee. A mugshot. It was him. The same face. Pale, narrow. Same eyes. Same expression. The man I saw by the road. The one who stared at the ground like he was waiting for something. The one who turned to look at me like I'd ruined whatever plan he had. I sat there for a long time, just staring at the screen. I wasn't imagining him. He was real, and he was still out there. The authorities eventually caught him. About a week later, down in a different county. He'd broken into an old hunting shack and tried to steal food and clothes. A man living nearby called it in after seeing someone creeping around late at night. When they got him, he was wearing different clothes, but the face was unmistakable. I kept thinking about how he got ahead of me that night, how he was waiting in the road like he knew I was coming. There were no other turnoffs, no shortcuts. I would have seen him pass me if he'd gotten a ride, but he didn't. And still, he was there. The only answer that made sense was the one I didn't want to accept. He knew those woods. Maybe he'd been living in them for a while before the crash. Maybe he ran toward them on purpose when the van flipped. Maybe he'd seen my car coming and took a shortcut through the forest, some path only locals or desperate men would know. Or maybe he was never trying to hitch a ride. Maybe he was just watching the road, waiting to see who might come by, who might stop, who might be easy. And when I didn't stop, when I kept driving, maybe I became a problem. Or maybe just a mischance. I don't go camping alone anymore. Not because I'm scared of the woods. I'm not. But because I know now that sometimes it's not the animals you need to worry about. It's not the dark or the silence. It's the people watching from the trees. The ones who don't want help. The ones who aren't lost. The ones who are waiting. About 2 years ago, I took a solo trip to a small hunting cabin in Tennessee. It wasn't some cozy Airbnb or luxury getaway. It was basic, rough around the edges, and that's exactly what I wanted. I was in a bad place mentally. A long, draining breakup had left me feeling empty and worn down. I didn't want people asking how I was or trying to cheer me up. I just wanted to get away from everything. Somewhere quiet, away from screens and traffic and phone calls. Just silence. Just me, a few books, and the woods. The cabin was a friend of a friend's place. He only used it during hunting season, and he said I could stay as long as I wanted. It was about 3 miles off a gravel road, up a rough, narrow path that my SUV barely handled. No cell service, no internet, no landline. The cabin ran on a generator, and water came from a big tank I had to fill myself from a pump near the base of the hill. It wasn't fancy, but it had the basics: a bed, a small stove, a table, a wood-burning heater. No neighbors, no lights except mine, and at night, the dark wrapped around that place like a blanket. The first day was peaceful. I chopped a bit of wood for the heater, filled the water tank, set up my books and groceries, and made a quick dinner on the stove. I sat out on the porch with a flashlight and listened to the wind blow through the trees. Occasionally, I'd hear owls, rustling branches, insects buzzing, but nothing unusual, nothing alarming. When I went to bed, I actually felt good, like I could breathe again. The second night started the same. Made some eggs and toast for dinner. Read for a couple hours. I think it was close to midnight when I turned off the lantern and lay down. I was just starting to doze off when I heard it. A scream. Not some animal cry. Not a howl or shriek from a fox or coyote. It was a man. A clear, sharp voice yelling from the woods. Far enough that it was faint, but loud enough to make out the words. Help! I froze. It cut through the silence like a knife. I waited, not sure if I imagined it. Then it came again, louder. Help me. I sat up, grabbed my flashlight, and stepped outside. The night air hit me cold. The woods were black, thick trees in every direction. I pointed the beam of light out into the trees, but I didn't see anything. I stood still listening. Again, help, please. It came from the east, somewhere deep in the woods. I turned my head, trying to guess how far, but sound does weird things out there. It could have been half a mile or less, maybe more. I stood there for another minute, heart pounding, and yelled out, just once. I asked if they were okay, but there was no answer. Just silence again. Total silence. Now, I'm not the kind of guy who panics easy, but I've read enough stories, true ones and not so true, to know that running into the woods at night after a mysterious voice is just asking for trouble. Especially alone. Especially without knowing what the hell is going on. So I waited. I left the flashlight on and stood on the porch for maybe 15 minutes. The voice never came again. The woods stayed quiet. Not even insects anymore. Just still. Eventually, I went back inside. I kept a flashlight near the bed and didn't really sleep much that night. Just laid there listening. Every time a floorboard creaked or the wind moved the trees, I flinched. When the sun finally came up, I got dressed, made some coffee, and decided to go check out the area where I thought the screams came from. I packed a small bag, knife, water, flashlights, and protein bars just in case. I didn't want to get lost or stuck out there. The woods were thick and there weren't any real trails, so I just moved carefully and tried to keep track of landmarks. About an hour in, I found something. It wasn't much, just a clearing about the size of a small living room, hidden behind some dense brush. There was a ring of rocks with ashes, an old fire pit, some broken beer bottles scattered around, a torn-up sleeping bag lying half open, dirty and damp, a couple old granola wrappers, a pair of ripped jeans balled up in the corner. It looked like someone had camped there recently, but not like they were still around. No blood, no signs of a struggle, but it definitely looked abandoned. Something about it felt wrong. Not dangerous necessarily, but off, like someone had left in a hurry. Or maybe not left at all. I didn't touch anything. Just looked around, listened. Still nothing. Just whined through the trees. I took a few pictures on my phone, even though I didn't have signal. Then I made my way back to the cabin, slowly, checking behind me more than I normally would. I kept thinking about the screams. Why would someone be out there, screaming for help in the middle of the night, then vanish? Why didn't they answer when I called back? And who would camp out in a place like this, especially that far off any trail? That evening, I kept the porch light on. I didn't read or relax. I just sat there, staring out into the trees, waiting for something. I didn't know what. I was anxious and couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Then, as the sun started to dip behind the hills, I saw him. Way out past the clearing near the tree line, probably 70 or 80 yards away. A man, just standing there, still, facing the cabin. I stood up slowly and grabbed the flashlight. Even with the beam pointed right at him, I couldn't make out a face. He was too far, and the shadows played tricks. But he didn't move, just stood there like he was watching, not shifting his weight, not waving, not doing anything, just staring. I called out to him, didn't yell, just a strong, clear voice. No answer. I waved my arms. Nothing. Then, after maybe 20 or 30 seconds, he turned around slowly and walked back into the woods. Not running, not stumbling, just calm, steady steps until he disappeared behind the trees. I waited another hour out there, flashlight in hand. He didn't come back. No more noises. But I didn't sleep at all that night. At sunrise, I packed my stuff. Everything. Tossed it all into the SUV in under 15 minutes. Didn't even eat breakfast. I filled the water tank, turned off the generator, locked the cabin door out of habit, and got the hell out of there. The drive back down that gravel path felt like it took forever. Every time a branch cracked or a shadow moved in the corner of my eye, I tightened my grip on the wheel. I didn't tell anyone about it for a while. When I finally showed my friend the photos of the camp, he said he didn't recognize it. Said nobody else was supposed to be out there. I still don't know who that man was. Maybe he was camping illegally. Maybe he was high or drunk or lost. Maybe he wanted help. Or maybe he was trying to lure someone into the woods. I don't know, and I never found out. But I've never gone back to that cabin, and I never will. I booked the Airbnb because it was cheap and close to downtown Detroit. I was going there for a small freelance gig, just a couple of days of filming at a warehouse nearby. I didn't want to blow half my paycheck on a hotel, so I picked a listing that had no reviews but looked clean in the pictures. One-bedroom apartment, old brick building, nothing fancy, just somewhere to crash. The neighborhood wasn't great. When I pulled up, the streets looked rough, vacant lots, some boarded-up homes, a couple guys hanging out on the corner just staring at my car as I parked. There was broken glass on the curb and some trash blowing around. I double-checked the address. It was right. I got out, locked the car, and walked up to the building. The front door was already slightly open, like someone had let it swing shut without pulling it tight. Inside was a small lobby, no front desk, just stairs and peeling paint. The apartment was on the second floor. I took the steps slowly, trying not to touch the handrail. It was sticky. When I reached the unit, I used the keypad code the host sent. It worked fine. The door opened with a loud creak, like it hadn't been oiled in a while. The place itself was fine. Small, clean enough, like the listing said. The floors were cheap laminate, and there was a weird chemical smell, like it had just been cleaned with something strong. Living room had a tiny couch, a scratched-up coffee table, and a flat screen mounted crookedly on the wall. Kitchen was a kitchenette really, just a fridge, sink, and microwave. There was a hallway leading to the bedroom and bathroom. That's when I noticed the door. It was halfway down the hall, across from the bathroom. All the other doors were normal, but this one had a thick silver padlock right at the middle, bolted into a steel plate mounted on the door frame. The wood around it was cracked, like the door had been forced or kicked in at some point. I stood there for a second, staring at it. Right then, my phone buzzed. It was a message from the host. Asterisk, hey, just a heads up, please don't mess with the locked door in the hallway. It's for safety reasons. Thanks. Asterisk. I figured it was some kind of maintenance closet or maybe a shared utility room. We're to have it inside the unit, but I wasn't planning on snooping. I dropped my bag in the bedroom, pulled the sheets back to check for bed bugs, then unpacked my gear. Spent the afternoon at the warehouse shoot and got back around 9 p.m., tired and sore. The neighborhood was even sketchier at night. Hardly any streetlights worked. I jogged from my car to the front door and locked up behind me. Inside, it was quiet. I warmed up some food, watched something dumb on my phone, and finally went to bed around midnight. Around 2 a.m., I woke up to a bang. It was loud, sharp and metallic, like something hitting steel. I sat up instantly, heart already racing. I held still, listening. Nothing. The apartment was dead silent. No footsteps from the neighbors. No voices. Not even street noise from outside. I was just about to lie back down when I heard another sound. A soft scraping, coming from the hallway. I got out of bed, slowly. I didn't turn on the light. I tiptoed across the floor and peeked out the bedroom door. The hallway was dark, but I could see the locked door at the end. I stared at it, holding my breath. Then I heard it again, something scratching softly against the wood. From the other side, slow like fingernails or something thin dragging across it. I backed up. The sound stopped. I closed the bedroom door and locked it, though that didn't really feel like it would do much. I sat on the edge of the bed for a while, holding my phone, thinking about calling someone. But who? The host? The cops? I didn't even know what I'd say. Hey, there's a locked door in my Airbnb, and I heard scratching. No one would take that seriously. I didn't sleep much that night. I kept the lights on. Every small sound in the apartment felt louder. Every creak of the floor, every pop of the old pipes made me flinch. Eventually, I dozed off, probably around 5 a.m. Next morning, I got up early, took a fast shower, grabbed my things, and left. I didn't want to deal with that place in daylight either. I worked a long day and didn't get back until just before sunset. I almost booked another place, but I told myself I was being paranoid. Maybe it was just old pipes or rats in the walls. I didn't want to waste money moving to a new place for one more night. When I came back, the building looked the same. Quiet. I climbed the stairs and opened the apartment door. Right away, I noticed it. The padlock on the hallway door, it was different. The old one had been dull and scratched. This one was shiny and new, the kind of chrome that hasn't even collected dust yet. The plate was the same, but there were new screw heads on the frame. Someone had changed the lock. I stood there just staring at it. Then I opened my phone to look at the host message. I wanted to see exactly what it had said. It was gone, not just deleted, erased, like it had never been sent. I scrolled through the conversation history, and there was nothing about the door anymore. Just the code for the lockbox and a generic welcome message. I packed up fast, tossed everything in my duffel, and left within 10 minutes. I didn't even bother asking for a refund. I drove an hour outside the city and booked a cheap motel near the highway. It was gross, stained sheets and cigarette burns, but I didn't care. I slept hard that night, too tired and wired to think straight. 3 weeks went by. I mostly forgot about the trip, buried myself in work, stayed busy. Then one morning, I was scrolling through my feed while drinking coffee, and I saw a local news story trending for Detroit. Asterisk breaking. Woman found alive after raid on abandoned apartment. Asterisk. I clicked on it. Police had raided an apartment in a rough part of town after a tip from a neighbor. Inside, they found a woman chained inside a locked closet. She was alive, barely. Injuries. Malnourished. Traumatized. She'd been held for weeks. They arrested the man who'd been renting the unit out under a fake name. The article had a few pictures. One of them showed the hallway. Same peeling walls, same cracked linoleum floors, and the door, the one with the padlock. It was my hallway, my apartment. I sat there frozen, staring at it. I checked the address in the article. It matched the one in my booking email. Same building, same floor. I thought about the message that vanished, the lock that changed, the banging and scraping in the middle of the night. And I realized I was there while she was still trapped behind that door. Maybe the bang I heard was her trying to get attention. Maybe the scraping was her trying to claw her way out. And I had just stood there, frozen, listening, too scared to do anything. I never told anyone. Not the police, not the company, not even my friends. I couldn't explain it without sounding insane. And part of me didn't want to know more. I didn't want a detective calling me later to ask what I saw or heard. I didn't want to testify or sit in a courtroom or be connected to any of it. But sometimes at night, I still hear it. Not real, just in my head. That slow, soft scrape, like someone begging quietly for help and being ignored. This one still makes me feel sick to my stomach, even now. I've told a few people bits and pieces of it over the years, but writing it all out like this is something I've never done. I don't know if putting it down will make it better or worse, but maybe it'll help me make sense of it. It happened in 2019. My sister and I were doing a long road trip across the country. We'd both taken time off work and decided to go from coast to coast, stopping wherever we felt like. We didn't really have a strict schedule, just a rough route. Around mid-September, we were somewhere in Colorado, near the San Juan Mountains. It was gorgeous, mountains in the distance, trees just started to turn, crisp air. We'd been camping and sleeping in cheap motels for most of the trip, but that night we decided we want a real bed and a roof over our heads. I started searching rental sites on my phone, and we came across this cabin listing. It didn't have any reviews, which we thought was weird, but the photos made it look really nice. Small, rustic wooden place tucked into the woods, with a little loft area, wood-burning stove, and wraparound porch. It wasn't on Airbnb or one of the big-name sites, just some lesser-known app I downloaded months ago and forgot about. The listing said it was newly added, which explained the lack of reviews. It was cheap, too. Seemed like a good deal. I booked on the spot. We drove about 2 hours from where we were and arrived just as the sun was going down. It was deep in the woods, no neighbors, no lights anywhere. The GPS lost signal about 10 minutes before we got there, so we had to go by the directions listed in the confirmation email. The dirt road leading to the cabin was long and winding, barely wide enough for the car. When we finally saw the cabin, we were both relieved. It looked like the photos, more or less. A bit more worn in person, but still cozy looking. There was no check-in process. The door was unlocked, and a small piece of paper was taped to the inside of the front door. It just said, "Welcome, enjoy your stay." Nothing else. No Wi-Fi password, no emergency contacts, nothing. There was no cell signal either, which didn't surprise us given how far out we were. Inside, it was cold and smelled like old wood and dust. Not bad, just musty. We turned on the lights. They worked, so the electricity was running. There was a small kitchenette, a wood stove, a couch and coffee table, and a ladder leading up to the loft, which just had a mattress and a lamp. The bathroom and 2 small bedrooms were downstairs in the back. We settled in, unpacked a bit, and made a quick dinner using some stuff we had in the cooler. We were both tired from driving all day, so we didn't explore much. My sister went to take a shower, and I walked around to check things out. The place was small, maybe 700 or 800 square feet total, so there wasn't much to see. But one thing immediately caught my attention: the basement door. It was in the hallway near the bedrooms. It was clearly a basement door with a deadbolt and a thick wooden frame. But what was weird was that it had several wooden planks nailed across it. Not just 1 or 2, at least 5 thick boards running horizontally, nailed in deep. It looked like someone was actively trying to keep something inside. Or outside. Either way, it didn't sit right with me. I didn't say anything at first because I didn't want to freak my sister out. She's not easily scared, but something about that door put me on edge. Later that night, I joked about it, said maybe they had rats down there or something. She laughed and shrugged it off, but I noticed she didn't look too comfortable either. We went to bed early. I took the smaller room, and she took the one across the hall. The woods outside were absolutely silent. No cars, no wind, no animals. Just stillness. The first night passed without much incident. I had trouble sleeping, but mostly because I wasn't used to how quiet it was. The next day, we made coffee and went for a short hike. There were no trails near the cabin, so we just walked along the road and explored the woods a little. We didn't see another person or car the entire time. We got back in the afternoon and made some soup on the stove. That night, the air felt heavier somehow. Maybe it was the cold setting in, maybe just my nerves. We both woke up around 3 a.m. I didn't check the time, but it felt like the middle of the night. What woke me was the sound of footsteps, slow, heavy ones, on the upper floor. I lay frozen for a moment, trying to figure out what I was hearing. My first thought was that it was my sister, but she was downstairs, same as me. We hadn't gone up to the loft since we arrived. The steps were clear, like boots on wood, moving across the loft floor and stopping above where the couch was. I didn't move. I didn't call out. I just stared at the ceiling and tried to listen. After a while, the steps stopped. I didn't hear anything else. The next morning, my sister looked pale. She told me she'd woken up in the night and thought she heard someone walking above us. We both went upstairs together. Nothing looked disturbed, but there were muddy footprints across the wooden floor. They were spaced out, large, and pointed toward the edge of the loft, like someone had stood there and looked down into the living room. There was no mud outside. It hadn't rained. The prints weren't ours. We hadn't worn shoes inside, and they were fresh, still a little damp. That's when we decided to leave. No matter what was going on, we weren't going to spend another night there. We packed up everything, double-checked the car, and locked all the doors. But we still had no cell signal. We drove for over an hour before we got even one bar. I kept refreshing the app, trying to find a listing so I could report what happened. But when I finally got enough signal and opened the app, the cabin listing was gone. Not booked or unavailable, completely gone. I searched by location, keywords, even looked through my email for the link. Nothing. It redirected to a blank page. I tried messaging the host through the app, but the conversation history was wiped. The name didn't come up anymore. It was like it had never been there. I ended up emailing the company directly, explaining the situation and asking if they could pull up the record. They responded a day later, saying there was no listing that matched the address or name I'd given them. They claimed nothing like that had ever been on their platform. We talked about calling the police, but what would we say? That we booked a cabin that doesn't exist? That someone walked around upstairs at night? There wasn't any actual crime to report. We hadn't been hurt. Nothing had been stolen. We felt stupid, embarrassed even, like maybe we'd missed something obvious. But here's the thing. We still had the directions printed out from the confirmation email. I had screenshots of the booking page, the receipt, even the host profile. None of those links work anymore, but the images are still on my phone. I've looked at them so many times, trying to figure out what we missed. But they look real. The photos, the address, even the host name, it all looked completely normal. Legit. We never figured out who owned that cabin, or who was walking around upstairs that night. We don't know if someone was squatting there, or if the whole listing was a trap of some kind. We don't know if we were watched while we were sleeping. Or worse, all I know is we left at the right time. If we'd stayed one more night, I don't think we would have woken up to footsteps. I think we would have woken up to someone standing in our rooms. Or maybe not woken up at all. Since then, I double-check every rental I book. Reviews, host profiles, property records if I can find them. I don't trust anything with no history anymore. Because once you're out there, in the middle of nowhere, no signal, no neighbors, no way to call for help. Whatever happens, it's just you. And if you realize too late that you're not supposed to be there, no one's going to come looking. We've been planning that trip for months. My wife and I had both grown up hiking and camping in the Southeast, and we wanted our kids to experience it the way we had, real, deep woods, not the kind of stuff you see from the highway. No noise, no light pollution, just us in the forest. We settled on the Cayuga Wilderness in northwest Georgia. Huge stretch of protected land. No cell service, no buildings, just miles of backcountry trails and campsites. It was warm that week, a typical southern summer. The days were hot and sweaty, but the nights were clear and surprisingly cool. You could hear every little thing in those woods. Coyotes far off, owls in the trees, bugs humming and buzzing constantly. It was our second night out there. We'd hiked in a few miles and found this flat clearing tucked behind a thick wall of pine trees. It was perfect, dry, shaded, and soft underfoot from decades of pine needles layering the ground. We pitched the tent in the center, laid out our sleeping pads and bags, and made a small fire just off to the side. My wife made dinner, the kids roasted marshmallows, and our dog, an older lab mix named Cody, kept busy sniffing everything in sight. That evening was beautiful, still warm, quiet. I remember thinking how peaceful it was. My wife had already tucked the kids into their sleeping bags, and I stayed out by the fire a little longer with Cody before finally climbing in. At some point during the night, I woke up, not gradually, not to a dream or because I had to pee. I woke up like someone had thrown a bucket of ice water on me. My heart was already pounding. There was this moment, maybe 2 or 3 seconds, where I had no idea why I was awake. Just total confusion and this rising, primal fear in my chest. And then it happened. The crash. The boom. Like a bomb going off right next to the tent. It was the loudest, most violent sound I'd ever heard in the woods. It wasn't thunder. It wasn't an animal. It was the sound of a huge tree coming down. And not just falling, but tearing through the forest, ripping branches, shattering smaller trees, until it slammed into the ground with this stomach-dropping impact. It was maybe 15 feet from where we were sleeping. The ground actually shook. For a few seconds after that, all I could hear was cracking. Not just one crack, but dozens of them. Limbs, trunks, underbrush, all snapping like bones. I didn't even realize it at the time, but I was frozen. I couldn't move, couldn't think. It was like my body had locked up. My wife was awake too. I could feel her body trembling next to me, but neither of us moved. I could hear the kids crying, Cody whimpering low and quiet, and all I could think was we were done. I honestly thought more trees were coming down and that there was no way we'd all get out in time. The whole forest sounded like it was collapsing. Then there were more crashes. Not as loud as the first one, but close. One to the left of us, another to the right. It was this weird, terrifying chain reaction. One tree takes down others as it falls. It was like watching dominoes tip over, except each one was massive and unpredictable and could kill you in an instant. You can't outrun that. You can't guess where the trees are going to land. There's no direction to run that feels safe. But then nothing. Silence. No wind. No rustling. Just total, eerie silence. It was as if the whole forest had gone dead quiet. Even the insects stopped. I remember lying there, waiting, bracing for the next crash, expecting that at any second we were going to get crushed. I had my hand over my son's chest, just trying to keep him calm, even though I was absolutely losing it inside. Every muscle in my body was tight, like I was holding myself together by force. Minutes passed, or maybe just seconds. It was hard to tell. My sense of time had completely warped, but the noise didn't come back. Nothing fell. Eventually, I turned on my headlamp. The beam flickered against the nylon of the tent, and I half expected to see branches or debris sticking through the sides. But everything looked intact. I unzipped the door slowly, dreading what I might find. I stepped out barefoot and shaky. The air was heavy and still. My light hit the pine needles and cast these long, nervous shadows. Then I saw it. The tree. This enormous pine, maybe 80 feet tall, had crashed down just a few steps away from our tent. The base had snapped clean, looked like it had rotted from the inside, and it had fallen perfectly between 2 other trees, flattening a ton of undergrowth in its path. What shocked me even more was that the other trees it had hit had fallen too. Like the impact knocked them out of balance, but they had landed in this weird V shape around the original trunk. One to the left, one to the right. Nothing, not a single branch or twig, had touched the tent. It was surreal, like someone had traced an outline around us and said, "Don't cross this line." The branches were all tangled and twisted just feet from where we'd been lying. One wrong angle, one more foot in any direction, and things could have ended very differently. Cody was out of the tent now, sniffing like crazy and pacing in small circles. I looked up at the remaining trees around us. Tall, thin pines swaying ever so slightly, but not a single breeze. I checked the sky, clear as ever, stars bright. No lightning, no storm. Just still, dense quiet. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. My wife didn't either. The kids eventually dozed off again, probably from sheer exhaustion, but we lay there listening. Every tiny crack, every pop of a branch in the distance felt like another tree about to fall. I kept replaying the sound in my head, trying to figure out why it had fallen. Maybe rot, maybe a wind gust I didn't notice, maybe just age. But it didn't make sense that it happened on such a calm night. And the way the other trees fell, it felt too precise, too close, like they missed us on purpose. In the morning, I walked the area more thoroughly, took pictures, measured the distance from the tent to the trunks. 13 feet to the first impact point. 2 fallen trees angled like bookends around us. One had actually crushed the fire ring we used the night before. The rocks had been scattered and pushed into the dirt. If we had pitched the tent just a few feet farther to the right or left, we'd have been under it. No exaggeration. We packed up camp as fast as we could. No breakfast, no coffee. We just wanted out. The trail back felt longer than I remembered. I kept looking up at every tree, every branch, imagining them falling. It was like the fear had carved itself into my bones. I didn't feel safe again until we were in the car with the doors shut and the wheels moving. We've been camping since. We still love the woods, but I always check the trees now. I tap them with my boot, look for signs of rot or lean. I don't set up near tall dead trunks or soft ground, and I never assume it's just going to be a quiet night, because that was the most terrified I've ever been. Lying in a tent, unable to protect my family, just waiting to see if the forest would crush us or let us live. And for reasons I'll never fully understand, it let us live. Not even a twig touched us, but it could have. It so easily could have. I needed to get away. That's all it was supposed to be, a break. A few days alone in the Smoky Mountains to clear my head. No phone, no emails, no traffic. Just trees, fresh air, and silence. I found a listing for a small off-grid cabin, tucked deep into the woods on a private stretch of land. No neighbors, no reception. It ran on solar, had a wood stove, a water tank, and nothing else. It sounded perfect. I got there in the early afternoon. The drive up the gravel road was rough, narrow, winding, and barely wide enough for one car. There were no signs, no streetlights, and no fences. Just forest pressing in on both sides. The cabin itself was small, one room, a bed, a small kitchen area, a desk near the window, and a composting toilet around back. It sat on a raised wooden deck with 2 steps leading up to the door. The whole place creaked when I walked. I didn't mind. I actually liked that kind of thing. The first day passed quietly. I unpacked, chopped some firewood from the stack beside the shed, and read for a while out on the deck. The sun dipped early behind the trees, and by 8 p.m., it was already pitch black. I cooked a simple dinner on the gas stove and then went to bed early, listening to the crickets and frogs outside. The second night was when things changed. I woke up at around 2 a.m. It was the kind of waking where your eyes just snap open and you don't know why. I laid there for a second, not moving, just listening. The forest was dead silent. No bugs, no wind, not even the trees rustling. Just stillness. Then I heard it. Knock, knock, knock. Soft, slow, barely louder than someone tapping with their knuckles. It came from the front door. I didn't move. I just laid there, frozen. My first thought was that maybe it was an animal, a raccoon or something, but it didn't sound like an animal. The knocks were spaced out, deliberate. Then came a few more. Knock, knock. I finally sat up slowly and pulled the blanket off. The room was cold. I tiptoed to the window and moved the curtain an inch to peek outside. No one was there. The deck was empty. The 2 steps were clear. I stared for a long time, but nothing moved. No one walked away. No shadows. I stayed there until my legs started to cramp. Then I crawled back into bed and stayed under the covers until morning. When the sun finally came up, I forced myself to open the door and look outside. The wood of the deck was wet from dew, and near the steps was a single muddy footprint. Barefoot, left foot, big, much bigger than mine. and fresh enough to still be slightly damp. The print made something tighten in my chest. I didn't know what to make of it. It couldn't have been from me. I wore boots the whole time, and I hadn't been out since dinner. I looked around the clearing, but there were no more prints. Just that one. As if someone stepped up onto the deck, then, I don't know, disappeared. The rest of the day, I was on edge. I kept telling myself it was probably a hiker or someone lost, but how likely was that? This cabin was 10 miles up a barely usable road, completely off-grid. The footprint didn't make sense. I stayed inside most of the day, barely eating, trying to read, but not absorbing a single word. I stacked the firewood in front of the door before bed. It felt dumb, but it made me feel a little better. I kept the axe next to the bed. That night, just after 2 a.m., it happened again. Knock, knock, knock. The same slow, soft tapping, like whoever or whatever was doing it wanted to be let in. I sat up and grabbed the axe, heart thudding so hard I felt dizzy. I didn't go to the window this time. I just sat there in the dark, holding my breath, waiting for something else. But nothing came. The knocking stopped after maybe a minute. Then silence again. The next morning, I checked. The firewood I stacked in front of the door was still there, untouched, but I found another muddy footprint. This one was right outside the window, near the side of the deck. Same bare foot, same direction, like it was facing the cabin. By this point, I was done trying to explain it to myself. I didn't have any reception, no way to call anyone, and no one knew exactly where I was, not even my family. I decided I would leave the next morning. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the corner of the cabin with the axe across my lap, staring at the door. And sure enough, at exactly 2:03 a.m. by my watch, the knocking started again. Knock, knock, knock. I didn't move. I just stared at the door. I knew whoever was doing this was just standing there, watching, waiting. I never heard footsteps arrive or leave. No crunching leaves. No sound of someone jumping off the deck. Nothing. Morning couldn't come fast enough. As soon as the sun started to rise, I packed everything in a rush. I barely ate, just threw stuff in my backpack and loaded the car. I didn't bother locking the cabin. I didn't care. I just wanted to get out of there. The gravel road felt even longer on the way down. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel. I kept glancing in the mirrors, half expecting to see someone step into the road behind me. And just as I rounded a bend where the trees opened up for a few seconds, I saw him. In the rearview mirror, a man, shirtless, covered in mud, standing motionless between the trees. His arms were hanging by his sides, his head slightly tilted, just watching the road, watching me leave. I didn't stop. I didn't slow down. I drove until I got to a gas station an hour away and used their payphone to call my brother. I made up a story about car trouble just so I didn't have to explain what really happened. I didn't want to say it out loud. It's been almost a year now, and I haven't told anyone else. I don't know who that man was. I don't know if he lived in the woods or if he was just passing through. But he knew I was there. He came every night. Same time, same knocks. And he never tried to break in, never said a word. Just knocked and watched. That's what makes my skin crawl the most. But he didn't want to hurt me. He just wanted me to know he was there. It was supposed to be a relaxing weekend. My fiance and I had been planning a quiet camping trip for months. Just the two of us and our dog, away from work and the endless noise of city life. We picked a fairly remote campground in Arkansas, tucked deep into the forest about an hour from the nearest town. The place was peaceful. There were only about 5 or 6 other campers scattered across the area. You could barely see them through the trees, and the only real signs of others being around were distant murmurs of laughter and the occasional flicker of campfires at night. We set up our tent near the edge of the small lake that sat in the middle of the campground. It was a nice spot, quiet, shaded, and just a short walk to the communal fire pits and grill stands. The sun was starting to dip behind the tree line, casting long shadows across the ground as we prepped our little dinner. My fiance was cutting vegetables while I handled the grill, flipping a couple burgers and toasting some buns. The air smelled like pine and charcoal, and for once, we both felt completely at ease. Then, just as I reached over to grab the tongs, we heard it. A man's voice yelling, loud and panicked. It wasn't the kind of playful yell you hear from drunk campers messing around. It was desperate, a raw, cracked kind of scream that stopped everything cold. I froze and looked at my fiancée, who had already dropped the knife and was staring wide-eyed in the direction the sound came from. It was off to the left, maybe 2 or 3 camp spots over. I didn't wait. I ran. I didn't even think to grab a flashlight or my phone. The ground was uneven, roots sticking out of the dirt, pine needles crunching under my feet as I rushed toward the sound. When I got there, I stopped so fast I nearly fell over. A man, probably in his late 40s, was standing near a picnic table, his face twisted in pain. Blood was pouring down his leg, pooling around his ankle, soaking into the dry dirt like water into a sponge. His shorts were stained dark red. It took me a second to even register what I was looking at. He was wobbling on one foot, clutching a blood-soaked towel to his ankle, but it wasn't doing much. Blood was still spurting out in pulses, and it hit me all at once. He'd nicked an artery. It was like a damn fountain, every beat of his heart pushing more blood out onto the ground. My fiancée caught up to me just seconds later, and thank God for that, because I was already starting to feel faint. Blood has always messed with me. I can't even watch medical shows without turning green. But this was real, and it smelled like metal and dirt, and something sharp that made the back of my throat burn. She took over instantly, grabbing the towel, applying pressure, lifting his leg onto the bench to get it elevated. She was calm, focused. I remember seeing her hands shaking just slightly, but she didn't stop. I snapped out of it and ran back to our site as fast as I could to grab my phone. But of course, no signal, nothing, just a dead, empty screen of no service staring back at me while this guy was losing more blood by the second. I knew the nearest hospital was about 20 miles away. I had seen it on the map when we were researching the campground. It was a small place, more of a local clinic than a real hospital, but it was something. I had maybe half a second to decide what to do. Wait for an ambulance that might take 40 minutes to even get here, or throw this guy in his truck and drive. I jumped into action. I found his keys on the picnic table, shouted for my fiancée to keep pressure on the leg, and ran around to start his truck. He had a big, older model pickup. I helped him hobble over, one arm around my shoulder, the other gripping the door. Blood smeared onto my clothes, hot and slick and heavy smelling. The second he was inside, I slammed the door shut, jumped into the driver's seat, and took off. I didn't care about the speed limits. The road out was narrow and full of sharp turns, but I didn't lift my foot off the gas. The truck roared, tires grinding gravel as I barreled down the forest road. I kept looking over at him, his head leaned back, eyes closed, muttering something I couldn't make out. His lips were pale. His breathing got slower. His fingers were twitching. I kept talking to him, even though I didn't know if he could hear me, just saying anything to keep him awake. The whole cab smelled like iron and sweat, and every time we hit a bump, I saw more blood pooling under the seat. I don't know how I didn't throw up. I reached the hospital in 12 minutes flat. I still don't know how I managed that. I don't remember most of the turns, just the rising panic and the sharp focus of adrenaline that kept me from passing out. I screeched into the emergency entrance and slammed the horn until someone came out. Nurses rushed out with a wheelchair and hauled him out. As they opened the passenger door, I saw a puddle of blood spill out onto the pavement, thick and dark. One of them shouted for more help, and they disappeared through the sliding glass doors. I sat in the truck for a while after that, breathing like I'd run a marathon. My hands were shaking, blood on my shirt, my legs, even on my face. I hadn't even realized he'd been gripping my arm the whole way and left deep red prints where his fingers had been. My fiancée arrived about 30 minutes later in our own car. She had stayed behind with his dog, a nervous-looking mutt that hadn't stopped pacing since the whole thing started. We spoke to the hospital staff and explained what happened, answered a few questions, and then left. They said he was lucky. If we hadn't gotten him there when we did, he would have bled out. When we got back to the campground, the adrenaline finally wore off. I sat down by the fire pit and stared into the flames, trying to get the image of all that blood out of my head. The dog wouldn't leave our side, like he knew we had helped his owner. We fed him and kept him close, even unzipped the tent to let him sleep near us that night. None of us got much sleep. Around 10:30 that night, headlights cut through the darkness. I stood up, half expecting it to be a ranger or someone checking in, but it was him. The man we had driven to the hospital. He stepped out of the truck slowly, a fresh bandage wrapped tight around his ankle. He limped toward us with 18 stitches and a look that said everything. The doctor told him point blank, if we'd waited for help, he would have died. He thanked us without saying anything, just nodded, sat beside the fire for a few minutes, and then called his dog over and went back to his site. We didn't talk much after that. I think we were all just too drained. That night was quiet, but sleep didn't come easy. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the blood. The way it pulsed out, the way he started fading in the truck, the weight of his body as I tried to keep him upright. It stuck with me. We left the next morning, cutting the trip short. We didn't say goodbye to anyone, just packed up and drove in silence for a long time. I still think about that night sometimes. About how fast something can go from peaceful to life or death. About how a quiet camping trip turned into a race against time. It didn't feel real until weeks later when I was still scrubbing faint brown-red stains off the truck floor. It wasn't a ghost story or some wild animal encounter. Just real life, real people, real blood. And the moment you realize how close someone came to dying right in front of you, we went out there to get away from everything. We came back with a memory that I'll never be able to shake.